Okay. Hey, folks. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Sunday. Thank you all for hanging with me tonight. My bad. I had to just knock out a few little tidbits before we started. I didn't want to come on here unprepared because I had a bunch of notes that I had written down, and God willing, we will get through them all. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get my hellos in really quick in the chat. Hopefully, you guys can hear me pretty good or pretty well. Let's see here. Let's scroll up. So let me go to the thing, and then we'll actually start officially in like about 3 minutes. All right, I'll just give people a minute to get on here. All right, let's see what we're talking about here. Yay, Calvin's gonna be here. Can't wait. What up, Julian? Make sure y'all check out his channel too, Julian Steve. He has a really interesting channel where he has lots of different viewpoints on things, especially all things black, right? So definitely check him out. What up, Deep Radford? Let's see. She said, "Who's getting the smoke today?" I'm gonna give a light in the Byron Donalds. I tell you that. Let's see. Make sure you don't forget to make your tea before the live. Listen, I told you I'll be having it together now. It's right here and it's ready. Like this microphone stand is all in the way. Oh Lord, okay, that's not gonna work. I gotta be able to access my tea faster. Let me move these headphones. I was recording some stuff earlier. Podcast, because the podcast is out. So for those who kept asking, there's a new Comedically Hard-Headed podcast episode that is out right now. I know y'all kept asking, so I tried to really make sure we got it out this weekend. Yeah, so that just came out today. It will be added to the YouTube channel a few months from now. For those who are new, I do have a podcast called the Comedically Hard-Headed Podcast. It is a storytelling podcast, totally unrelated to this content. So that's something you listen to when you just need to laugh. That's not about politics and all the heavy stuff. That's just about whatever's happening in life that I want to share, right? And so normally I'll have those episodes have their initial run on the streaming platforms, and then I'll add them gradually to the YouTube channel. So that means this week I'll be adding a new episode to the YouTube channel, but it won't be the new episode that just went live. It'll be an episode, I think, 2 or 3 episodes behind where we currently are. So if you want to be caught up, you can just search Comedically Hard-Headed on any streaming platform like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeart. What else is there? This SoundCloud. It's everywhere. Deezer. You can find me everywhere. Stitcher. So that's what that's about, right? All right. All right. Somebody said, "Oh, is he late? I thought YouTube was messing with me again." Listen, I'll be trying to get here on time. Stuff be happening, okay? Life be lifing, all right? I apologize. We're gonna make sure that I am on time for the next one. You know, this will be the deal. If I'm late on the next one, we'll do a giveaway. Right? Somebody hold me to that. So if I'm late for the next live, we will do a giveaway for 3 people. All right, gift card for like $20 or something. All right. Oh, look at Ayana. See, Ayana's already heard the podcast. She said cackling at the kids calling that lady a pill popper. See, you just have to hear the episode to know what she's talking about. All right. Man, let me close this one thing to slow my stuff down. All right. What up? All right, we got to start. How's everybody doing? What up, Son, Piscean Beauty, Montrez Jones, Tyler Hackner, Allen. What up? Deneen Grant said, tardy, unexcused. Look, I know when I was in high school, I was always late. And it didn't make any sense because especially I had a car by senior year. So there's like no reason to be late because I lived in a small town. School was down the street. Still late. Why? Because we're stopping at McDonald's and getting McGriddles and everything else, right? And if they put cheese on my McGriddle, I turned around and made them give me another one because I said I didn't want cheese on it because whatever cheese they serve on that is nasty. JoJo said the cliffhanger. Yeah, it's wild. That's the podcast. Y'all got to get into it, right? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump because there's so much to cover. Just a few other things. I'll probably check out the Bad Boys movie tomorrow, so we'll try to put a review up for it. I didn't get a chance to watch it this weekend. My plate was just a little full. Put out a few fires, but they're all handled, so amen. What else did I have? We already talked about the podcast. It is so funny. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, I specifically said, do not send me any clips of my favorite entertainers concert tour right now, because I'm trying to actually go to the show in July and enjoy it without already seeing the whole show. But I get it. Y'all love me. Y'all want me to be excited. And so y'all all sent me literally the whole show. I said, y'all, I had to like mute everything related to the Together Again tour, so I don't see any of it. Because I told y'all, every time, depending on who it is, there's certain entertainers that I just have such an appreciation for that when they go on tour, I can't ever just be like a normal person and wait for my show, right? I can't just wait for my show and then enjoy it and be surprised like everybody else. I've already dug through the YouTube trenches, and I've seen all the performances, and I know when the dancers are going to come from this side and when the stage is going to rise and when this person's going to come down. I told myself I ain't doing that this go around. I did pretty well last time, right? I didn't really see much of the show, so when I actually went, it was a great time. I want the same thing. She said that she made a whole bunch of changes. I don't want to see the changes. I don't want to know the set list. I don't want to know what she looked like. I'll see her when I see her next month. That's just a note for everybody, but I appreciate it, right? Anyway, so I want to jump right into it. All right, let's talk Project 2025. Now, we've talked about it a few times on this channel, but I've kind of just brushed over it a little bit, or it's kind of been more so of a reference mention. And the thing is, it's such a massive document, like, goodness. So it's 900 plus pages of content, right? And this is all about the long-term goals and ideas that specifically conservative white men in this country would like to have for the long run. Right now, this is something that has over 100 different coalition partners. What I mean by that, when I say coalition partners, these are groups of people with money, right, that have put money into this. Now, so far, this is a $22 million project. That's not a lot of big money now because this is still in the early grassroots stages, but understand that they are locking this mess in, right? And when I say locking in, they already have, in the event that this November election goes in the way of Trump, right? They already have over 1,000 people locked in and ready to go to be put into new positions that would continue to help push Project 2025. But please understand that, and I want people to also get that this is not just limited to whether or not Orange Man gets back into the White House. They're going to still push this whether he wins or loses, right? Because this is bigger than just the presidency. This is talking about conquering everything from the federal level down to the state, down to the local. They know exactly what it is they're doing. And this is why I always have been saying, at least since about 2018, that what people have been doing is they have been working to cement a lot of things, to make things irreversible, to make sure that they have a grip on what you call power in this country, to make sure that not only do they have a grip, but no one can undo that grip. No one, it's such a tight grip, you can't undo it, and that it's locked in for generations to come, because we understand that policy is living, policy is live. Policy is constantly evolving, and so that's why this game of politics is not something you can just jump out of. So going back to the idea of cementing, I just want to paint a bigger picture, right? So let's look at American politics like two big old trees, right? So a lot of times when we're talking American politics, everybody's pressed about the presidency. Okay, that's like the two main tree stumps. Yeah, presidency, vote for this person. The whole world's going to end if this person gets in. The whole world's going to end if that person gets in. And that's where it stops, right? That is your two trees, right? But then you have the branches. Branches is Congress, right? That's the House, that's the Senate, and they're the ones pushing and doing whatever they want to do with the laws. Then you have the smaller twigs and the smaller branches, right, that extend out. That's your local and state politics, right? And then you have the leaves, right? And those are all the little tiny implementations of small policy and different laws here and there, and even the smaller positions like your school boards and everything. And what happens when you have two trees that are next to each other, specifically a male tree and a female tree, right? Cross-pollination, right? You have the pollen that floats in the air, and all of us are choking and wheezing and sneezing from all of the spring until the end of the fall, right? And what's happening when that pollen is traveling across from tree to tree to tree, right? All of the pollen is mixing, right? Mixing, locking in, landing, and sort of cementing even new implementation, because it's going to influence growth. It's going to influence even more trajectory. It's going to influence momentum, right? That's kind of what American politics is, where there's always people working to cement things. So it's so much bigger than just the idea of the tree stump, because you can't get to the tree stump until you start with the pollen that pollinates and grows and plants some little tiny seeds somewhere, and things grow and sprout from there, and they're watered and nurtured, and before you know it, they're this big massive being that's in the way, and now you got some shade. That's American politics. And unfortunately, we have gotten into a space where everybody is very transactionary and reactionary, and in the space of what about the right now. Nobody's looking at the long term. Nobody's looking at what it is that we have come from, or what it is that has affected where we are today. Everybody's just all about the right now. And the odd part is we're in this space where, because there's so many interesting things taking place, right? Politically, globally, financially, economically, there's all kind of things taking place all around the world. I feel like there are so many who are overwhelmed with everything that's happening that some people are like, I'm checked out. I don't care no more. Or people kind of lock up and they fall into, if it ain't about me and mine, I don't care. I don't care. It don't matter. We'll be all right. And so folks start moving as if there's always the promise for next time. And the challenge is there's not always the promise for next time, right? And so the thing is, when we're talking about something like Project 2025, this is not something that will be undoable in one election cycle if it were to be implemented. This is not something that you can just fix overnight. Some of these things that if they're able to put in, it will take years to undo if they get undone. Because think about what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. There is policy that we thought was once precedent. It gets undone. It gets challenged. Something changes. And then it's not like the stuff just snaps back to normal once everybody's mad about it. No, it takes years to undo. Look at the tax code. So when we're talking about the changing of the tax code in 2018, right? The bill was put into play around 2017. They finally were able to pass it in 2018. Everybody's taxes went up, right? All of y'all were pissed off this year because everybody's tax return, if you weren't rich, wasn't as big as it normally was. And so in that aspect, the challenge is, right, it gets passed in 2018. Could the Biden administration have tried to go and undo it? Well, unfortunately, there were some elements in there where you just couldn't undo everything because one piece that was permanent was the permanent tax cut for the rich, something Paul Ryan implemented. So when we're talking about the tax cuts, yes, those are the Trump tax cuts, but Paul Ryan was the originator. He was the one writing everything. And what did Paul Ryan do as soon as it got passed? Quit and retired and went on to live his best life. And so to that point, when it came to that tax code, the question becomes, okay, well, this tax code is already implemented. Now, 2024 tax season will be the last era of that specific bill, and then things will go back to how they were before 2017, except the tax cut for the rich. So do we spend the hundreds of millions of dollars to go and shift and try to bring this tax code back over to how it was, or do we let it ride out because we need to latch on to other things that are just as important, like the infrastructure bill, or the fact that at the time we were smack in the middle of COVID, right? There's all these different things. So when it comes to policy, it's not just a flip of the switch and you can undo some of this stuff, right? And so people have to really understand that with politics, when stuff is signed into legislation, just expect for it to be there for at least a decade. Expect it to affect one full generation before there's a challenge to it, before it's undone. You don't see a lot of policy get undone. Even with the Affordable Care Act, as much as Republicans hate it, and as much as they've chipped away and yanked as many pieces of it away as they can, it's still here, right? This is something that was passed in, Barack Obama's first term before 2010, and they still have not been able to successfully 100% gut it. That's just how, cemented policy can be. Even when you chip away and strip and do whatever you want to do with policy, it takes a minute. And I think so many people are living in a space where they think we'll just ride out 4 years and then we'll be all good. Can we be honest? There's a lot of people who were like, as soon as Orange Man's out of there and the next administration comes in, things will get a whole lot better. And then here we are. You have an administration that has to spend all their time trying to undo the things that took place in the previous administration, but they don't really have a majority like that. So they haven't been able to get a whole lot done. And if anything, it almost seems like the previous administration is still in power right now, right? So there's just so many elements that are there. And so I want to go ahead and just go into some of the details of some of the things you can expect to see in Project 2025, right? I'm not going to go through all of it because 900 pages. All right, let's just go through the big pieces, right? So here are some of the pieces. Now, it has 4 pillars to it, but when we're talking about the playbook, that's the main piece that everybody's kind of concerned about. That's the piece that has people nervous, right? So a playbook of teams and transition plans that would gut most of the agencies Americans rely on to keep our country functioning. Think the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, the Environmental Protection Agency, and an independent Department of Justice, right? There would also become a private database of far-right loyalists who pretty much have made the vow to stand behind Trump. These are 20,000 people. And these 20,000 people will be put into positions of power within these agencies, within these divisions, with all of these positions that would lock into how all of us live our daily lives, right? These would be the people put over these agencies. And their goal is not to maintain the agency. It's more so to disrupt and destroy. Think about like Betsy DeVos in the Department of Education, a woman who had no experience in education, but they put her over education. And what did she do? Worked her darndest to destroy everything, even Title IX programs gutted under her watch, right? So a whole bunch of nonsense. And then they even decided to have the idea of a presidential administration academy to train future appointees on how to use the government to advance their agenda. Because understand, even after this generation of people in power dies, they want to maintain that power structure. So here is the booklet, here is the manual, this is what it is that we are going to stick to, and we're going to continue to implement it. We'll just push it in through the next generation. And this is where that 900 pages of legislation and documentation comes in regard to the mandates that fall into Project 2025. Some of the other things that they would like to do, even restricting access to STD testing, right? You walk around here burning and don't know why, and you can't even take a test to figure it out because it's banned. You just be down there scratching, right? Go get some penicillin, do something, right? So the idea of getting rid of STD testing, the idea of getting rid of in vitro fertilization, just all kind of really random things, birth control as well. And I do want to say, when it comes to birth control, I think people just assume birth control is about not having a baby, but for people that have menstrual cycles, there are some who have some that are so intense where the cramps are just so unbearable that they have to take something to kind of ease that experience, right? Which would limit how strong the contractions and everything else, or the cramps are, or how heavy the blood flow is. This is a little graphic, but we're adults here, okay? Let's have this conversation, right? And so there are some young girls and there are some women who are on birth control specifically to manage their menstrual cycles, because some of them are just so unbearably painful, especially if the women have fibroids, right? So there's all kind of different things that are tied to that, but they've kind of painted this idea of this is all centered on abortion. So just get rid of everything. Everything got to go, right? This would also deal with the conversation with climate change. Just know any kind of policy around climate change, gut it. Why does that matter? For them, most of them will be dead by the time all the bad stuff happens. So they could care less about the next generation, because it's all about get what is theirs right now, enjoy, live their best life, and so be it. They go on to glory, and good luck to everybody else, right? This is a conversation about thinking generationally, right? For those of you who are in your 20s, 30s, 40s, who plan on having children, your children are going to need a planet to live on. Their children are going to need a planet to live on. We're already within our lifetime going to see the long-term effects of climate change, especially by the time we get to 2050. When you talk about places like a Miami, places like a New Orleans, not even just New Orleans, but a lot of that Gulf region, even like a Savannah, Georgia, a lot of coastal cities are going to have an issue when it comes to rising ocean tides, right? All of this stuff plays a major role. Let me see what else we have here. The plan would also reject regulations that reduce environmental harm. It seeks to reduce or eliminate, again, the EPA and other agencies focused on environmental protection. It would reduce funding for renewable energy, right? So we're just going to keep on burning coal. The technology is right there to still maintain all the energy we want in a healthier and cleaner aspect. But no, because we already have too many lobbyists, as far as the coal lobbyists and everything else like that, and the fossil fuel industry, they don't want to mess up the money. So we're just going to keep pushing that. And I want to understand, even with that, there's certain terms that they would love to use to kind of keep people stupid. So think back to when you kept hearing the phrase clean coal. You know, it's going to be burning clean coal. There's no such thing as clean coal. Coal is coal, right? It's just the idea of making it sound a little less terrible to get people to buy into that idea of burning coal. It will burn clean coal. It's the same smoke and putting the same carbon in the air that's going to kill us, the carbon dioxide. But okay, right? So those are the kind of things that people have to kind of pay attention to. In addition, the idea of pushing more policy rooted in right-wing Christian nationalism. And I've said this a million times before, and people can get as mad as they want. Understand that right-wing Christian nationalism is not Christianity. That is whiteness, okay? The God of a lot of white evangelicals is whiteness. It has nothing to do with what's in the Bible. This is why they pick and choose what they want to recognize out of the Bible and weaponize it against everybody else. This is the idea in the worshiping of whiteness through the lens of American exceptionalism. That is what white national Christianity is in this country. Has nothing to do with spirituality, has nothing to do with loving your neighbor. This is all about punitive policy that punishes anybody who is not a white American in this country, specifically a straight white male, right? But they will push it all under the guise of Christianity and say that this is what God wants, right? Nonsense. All right, let's see where else we can go here. We've seen efforts as well undermining the idea of public education, right? So we already talked about them getting rid of the Department of Education. And instead of supporting public education, the plan would be to divert public money to private and religious school attendance. I'm going to get back to Jay-Z later on about this too, because understand that whole program that Rock Nation has jumped into with this $300 million, we're going to get to that. That has nothing to do with bettering the lives of Black children. That's pretty much playing into this same thing here as far as privatizing public education. Understand, in the same way that they try to privatize the USPS system, just think about the millions of pieces of mail that go out every day and the amount of money that could generate. understand that for many, many super wealthy people, it is a dream to privatize the United States Postal Service, because there will be billions of dollars to be made, which is why you had the cuckoo guy that was screwing up stuff, and all these different people do everything in their power to kind of almost bankrupt the USPS system. So that way, if the government has to step in, which they're not going to, then a private company or a private equity firm, we've seen a lot of those. That's why we no longer have a Red Lobster. That's why you're seeing private equity firms buy up all the real estate and everything like that. A big giant private company can buy up USPS, privatize our mail, make a lot of money. And then before you know it, you're paying to mail off a letter. It's not just that little cute stamp that you pay however many cents for. Now you're probably paying $2 to send a letter, right? And people are getting rich. Like, that's how close we were to that before 2020. So understand, there's a lot going on in that aspect, but it's the same thing with our public schooling. The idea of defunding public schooling, making it privatized, and understand that by privatizing education, it is going to leave out marginalized groups of people. It's going to leave out people who don't have the money to buy their way into the most prestigious K-12 institutions, right? That's what that's about. Right? We already know when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights, y'all can just go ahead and throw all that out the window. All that is gutted, canceled. Marriages will be undone. No adoption, no anything. Going back to being second-class citizens in the United States. We already know what that's going to be about. And even for people who identify as trans, you will no longer be eligible for Medicare. Right? That's cut and gutted. Let me see here. You already know anything with DEI is gone. Diversity, equity, inclusion, all that is gone. Get rid of all those programs. That includes scholarship programs. That includes onboarding training programs for different companies. Anything like that, that will all be gutted. That will be gone. Stopping federal agencies from collecting data that could be used to address racial inequality. That would end all of the research and the experience, what you would call like the investigations or the research into different things. I know some people for the longest always talk about HR 40 in regard to the conversation of reparations. Understand HR 40 technically is a federal research bit. Something like that would be gutted, right? Done for. Even though HR 40, I think there's some things they could work on in regard to that with reparations, right? Again, ending the Fair Housing Act. Now, we spent years talking about redlining. We've talked about what happened with the FHA program and how Black people were left out. That's pretty much just saying, okay, we're going to go back to life before the 1970s and go back to the idea of regulating where people can live. And understand how easy it is to do that right now. Like we said, 40% of all real estate is currently owned by a private equity firm or a private company. Not a realtor, not a human being, but some private company that bought everything with cash. Understand that if they wanted to push and do that, 40% of the housing market is already privatized anyway, so they wouldn't have to worry about regulation. It would be so easy to say, these people can't live here, those people can't live there, because they already own close to half of the property in the U.S. Like, understand, this is where we're at. The dominoes are there. They just need to tip one over and here we go. It's on and popping, right? What else? There's so much mass deportation of immigrants that are undocumented. Now, understand, people keep thinking, yeah, get rid of everybody. Getting rid of 13 million people, understand the economy is going to tank, because all of those positions and all the things that we depend on that we don't even think about will no longer be there. So when we're talking about all those fields that haven't been working, before y'all come on here talking about, well, those were the jobs that Black people used to have. And so understand that these people have been crooks, and they are lowballing these folks anyway. Black people are not going to be signing up to go pick oranges for $2 an hour. So kill the conversation, right? And so the conversation I'm trying to make around that is understanding that that will too tank the economy, right? I don't know if the economy is going to recover from something like that. A lot of this, to me, when we're talking about these conversations, is lip service and fake outrage and fake fear, right? There's bigger conversations around that, and I think there's a whole lot that can be said in regard to the conversation around immigration, especially when it comes to where federal dollars are going and how sometimes there are people who have already been United States citizens being left out of certain programs. That's more so the conversation, but we'll come to that another day. Let's see what else we got over here. Again, the idea, getting rid of the protections for dreamers. Those are kids whose parents brought them here when they were 3 or 4 years old, and now it's like, well, those protections are gone, right? Y'all can go back. Go to some place you don't remember being in. Good luck. Hopefully you know how to speak Spanish, right? So you have all of that. Dismantling the Department of Homeland Security. We're pretty much already there at this point, right? When it comes to the fact that so many of our elected officials are allowing for there to be so many open doors in regard to the shenanigans that's taking place with our national security, letting all kinds of agents from different countries come into our space and have access to a lot of things. I know people are so pressed and annoyed with Orange Man and the classified documents case, but understand a lot of the documents that were in those boxes are national secrets. right? Things that he should have not had. And he's had all kind of parties and had dignitaries and people all at his house, and they drinking champagne, and you got nuclear code, this and, well, maybe not the nuclear codes, but you got all kinds of different documents that talk about escape plans, or what happens if we go and declare war with this country, what happens if our U.S. military bases overseas are invaded, what's the next move. All those kind of documents have been floating around, and they are no longer protected. They're just sitting there. That's why there was this big giant case in Florida in regard to Mar-a-Lago, even though they're playing games with that. But again, national security is kind of in a space where there's a threat. We have tons of people right now who are compromised because money talks. People will sell out this country to get rich, right? And we're seeing that especially on the GOP side, where now you have all these people who have randomly aligned with Russia and the stuff that Russia has going. And, you know, we're just starting to see the nonsense, right? Again, another piece is giving unchecked power to the president, pretty much allowing the president to do whatever he wants to do. It is what it is. It'll get to the point where the president can actually shoot somebody on Fifth Ave and nothing happens. But if we're really looking at it, has he really been held accountable for anything anyway? Yeah, we know he was convicted in New York, but what are the chances that he's going to jail? We've seen what's happened with the Mar-a-Lago case, right? And we see what's happening in Georgia. Like, they, step by step, you are watching all of these cases just kind of get dismantled piece by piece, right? Anyway, Project 2025 plans to end the FBI's effort to combat disinformation and reduce the military's efforts to counter extremism and domestic terrorism. Remember how I said it was really weird that there was that big bombing in downtown Nashville and it just came and went and we never talked about it again? Like that kind of stuff where that becomes even more normalized. An entire downtown block of a major metropolitan city in the United States gets bombed during the holiday season, and everybody keeps moving like nothing happened, right? Okay. Anyway, then there's also the element, which I think is probably the most important part: pack all levels of federal government with loyalists who cannot check his power. In addition to that, stacking judges, right? Putting more judges that are locked in. And this also even goes back to Orange Man in the Supreme Court, right? So we know that right now you have two justices that are close to retirement age. And we know Clarence Thomas is one of them. And the thing is, in the event that a Republican is in office again, most likely those two are going to retire. What do you think Orange Man would do if he put somebody in? He's going to put somebody that's in that same age range as Amy and Kavanaugh, right? Put some people that are younger so that they can stay on the bench for another 40, 50 years. So at this point, we would be in a space where, let's just say Orange Man gets back in office and he's able to put two more Supreme Court justices on as to retire. That would mean that of the 9 justices we have, 5 of them are Trump appointed, right? So when we're talking about that idea of securing a legacy and cementing things, right? Trump will be long gone and turned into bones or whatever, but his policy and the impact of his decisions will still be here affecting us, right? Unless they start having some kind of shifts where the Supreme Court is not a lifetime appointment. And that's just the Supreme Court. We're not even talking about the appellate courts and the federal courts and everything. I think 2 or 3 lives ago, no, it wasn't even that. It was in my DEI video where we talked about just some of the justices or some of the people that were appointed or nominated for some of these federal court positions and how unqualified they were. Go back to that video. It's towards the end. We just talked about how, again, the idea of putting people into power that are going to push the agenda of what it is that you want, right? So that's kind of the crazy aspect of all of this. The changes would allow for the executive branch involvement in how election-related federal offenses are investigated, right? So you're going to have even more of what you call the cuckoo man loyalists who are going to do and put in all the policy that they want. But it doesn't stop there. We've already talked about birth control, right? Understand the conversation around women's reproductive rights. That's done. Even if it means that it's going to endanger the life of the mother, that is a wrap. You can let that go, right? When it comes to people that have mental disabilities or physical disabilities, the federal protections of that would also be gutted. So it will no longer be required for a building to make sure that they have a ramp that is accessible for people in a wheelchair to get in, right? It would no longer be required that on any kind of federal document or federal video that is showcased that you have captions so that people who are deaf and hard of hearing can be able to, you know, see what or understand what it is that's being presented, right? All of that kind of stuff. The idea of what you call 508 compliance. For anybody who works in the federal government, you know what that is, right? The idea of making sure that every kind of document that is presented is something that is accessible to each and every person who reads it, right? Making sure that you consider the experience of every single person so that everyone can be included in whatever policy making is being put out there or whatever agency, whatever service they have out there. You know, it's all about ensuring that each staff member or each reader or anybody who has interest in whatever it is has accessibility to that content if it's public information, all that kind of stuff. Pell Grants. They've already been getting rid of that anyway, but just know the last few that are left, we know the whole thing around CRT That's a wrap. This is going to affect the college level courses as well, right? Especially colleges that are federally funded, right? Birthright citizenship will also be going. We talked about that. Again, the idea of prioritizing fossil fuels, right? And this also means that protected land spaces are now in danger. So when you're talking about all that beautiful land in Alaska and Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota and Idaho and Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon and Northern California and parts of Nevada, parts of Arizona, parts of New Mexico, parts of Texas, all of these different places where you have these big national forests and these different spaces and glacier parks and all that crap will no longer be protected, because that means if you can find some oil, we need to get out there drilling. Doesn't matter what animals are out there. Who cares? It's all about the dollar, right? That's how we do things around these parts, right? Ending the independence of the FCC. Understand, FCC is kind of what regulates what's on our television to make sure that they just aren't out here doing any and everything. But by getting rid of the idea of an independent FCC and making it more so an agency that pushes propaganda, you could now put anything on. You could literally lock in what would be allowed on television. If you have people that take over the FCC, they can say, you know what? MSNBC, you can go. Democracy Now, you can go. Let's see, the Young Turks, whatever that weird channel is, y'all can go. And the only news agencies that will be deemed as reputable news sources will now be Newsmax, OAN, and Fox News. Those will be your news sources, right? Like it just goes into a space of deregulating what is allowed to be on TV, or the idea of monopolizing the content that we consume in regard to what it is that's our media. We're already kind of there anyway, because really our media is run by like 6 major corporations, and they all, push whatever it is that we're going to consume. But we're almost there, right? This also includes getting rid student loan forgiveness programs. That's already being fought against anyway, right? But the idea of just totally gutting it, especially that program that was implemented during the Obama administration, where it was like, okay, if you're in public service, if you're a teacher, you pay your loans for 10 years, you'll be forgiven automatically. Like, they've already been trying to gut that program for years. But understand, teachers, that's a wrap for you as well. Let's see. Okay, and then again, tax dollars to religious institutions. We kind of talked about that as well, but tax dollars to religious schools, religious institutions, because the idea, again, when we talk about that white Christian nationalism that they pass off as Christianity, the idea of we're going to open our own schools and we will teach our own children, and now they get to pull out of tax dollars that you're paying, for their children to go to these schools that will exclude yours anyway. That's really what that's about, right? This would also include the idea of ending unions. Unions have got to go, right? So think about how UPS was able to fight and claw and unionize, and boom, they were able to get everybody some of those raises, right? Think about what happened with United Auto Workers and how they fought for the different rights that they wanted, and they were able to win and get what it is that they want. Getting rid of the unions will fix all of that. That will be a wrap, right? We already know Affordable Care Act. That's going to be a wrap. Privatization of Medicare, we know that's going to be a wrap. Civil rights protections, they're already gutting that anyway, but just know that it would still be a continuation of that. We've already talked about the judges, right? We know HBCUs. Just know it's going down with y'all too. You're not protected just because you're in the wonderful utopian black space of excellence. That's also getting checked too, right? Tax cuts for the rich would be implemented at even higher rates, right? So that would continue. We already know something like PragerU would be more so institutionalized in our K-12 institutions and at a lot of the private institutions that are there. We talked about PragerU. PragerU is some nonsense, BS, propaganda, educational equipment or educational discourse that tries to teach Americans that all is well in the United States, and it's all about American exceptionalism, and slavery wasn't that bad, and Christopher Columbus was actually pretty good of a person, and at least when black people were enslaved, they had free housing, right? That's PragerU. Right? That's also the same thing Candace Owens was out there pushing when y'all were trying to act like all of a sudden she was down for the people. She's not, right? Repealing the 19th Amendment is possibly an option on the table, okay? Women, your right to vote is and if they're getting rid of the women's right to vote, black folks were up next, right? So you have that, right? We know Title I programs cut in regard to Title I schools. The idea of the Department of Justice expanding the possibility of the death penalty, making it easier to be sentenced to death for different crimes. And understand that a lot of times when people are put on death row, they're not executed right away. Sometimes this is a 10, 15, 20, 30-year process. It gives people enough time to go and get their lawyers and fight for themselves. And because we've seen so many be exonerated through DNA, right? Understand this would just expedite the process. You get convicted of whatever, they sentence you to death, and in 6 months you're out of here. Not 30 years. And so a lot of people would probably be unjustifiably, well, personally, I'm against the death penalty, so I'm not even going to say unjustifiably killed. But there's going to be a lot of people who end up being killed who may have been innocent. but the process was sped up on purpose because let's get the bad guys out of here, right? You're still going to have the book bans. Of course, libraries will still be getting closed. Still the idea of putting chaplains in the schools instead of librarians. So that stuff is still going to be changed and pushed and regulated, right? Even within the federal government, there would be banned words, right? When it comes to any kind of federal public rules, regulations, contracts, grants, pieces of legislation that exist, certain rules would be, or certain words would be banned. Words like reproductive health, words like diversity, words like gender, like those kind of things would be gutted and gone, right? And so again, understand there are so many layers to Project 2025 and we only scratched the surface, right? Hold on, I gotta take a sip on that. I'm tired of talking. But yeah, it's some nonsense going on out here. So when people keep trying to do this whole I'm unfazed, I'm unbothered, I'm checked out, I ain't voting no more, they had one shot with me and they ruined it, so it is what it is. Listen, unless you are super rich, you will be collateral to all of this. And I'm saying big money. If you make $200,000 or $300,000, you're not rich. Not in this conversation. You won't be able to buy yourself out of being collateral to this nonsense. You got to have some big money, right? And most Americans don't have big money. That's the bigger conversation. And so even when we talk about the idea of implementation, understand this has already been happening at a local level. Excuse me. Some lives ago, we were talking about the state of Louisiana. And we were talking about specifically why it was really pivotal about the election that they were having. There were some local elections that were really, really important. I just want to kind of paint one thing here that's taking place in Louisiana right now, because this goes back to, again, when you put enough cronies in power and lock in, and we're talking about the idea of cementing things, then you can get folks. That's my knocking on my door. Not while I'm doing a live. You're going to be out there for 2 hours waiting. Understand, when you got the cronies in there that have a certain movement that they're pushing towards and they're locked in, they can get so much stuff done. And so when we talk about Louisiana really quick, one of the interesting things here, New Orleans, right? S&WB was counting on $29 million from the state for its new power complex. It got zero, all right? A building houses turbines 4 and 5 at Carrollton Water Plant in New Orleans. Now, this is Friday. This article is just from June 4th. Right? The state legislative session wrapped up this week with a stunning result for the New Orleans Sewerage and Water Board on one of the city hall's top infrastructure priorities. The utility, which has been counting on tens of millions of dollars from lawmakers to help fund a new power complex, didn't receive anything in the state's budget. Utility officials were seeking $29 million in new capital outlay funding to get the energy substation and other equipment to power the city's drainage pumps and get the drainage pumps up and running before the 2025 hurricane season. But the final budget didn't include any funding dedicated to the project, according to budgeting documents. Now, would you like to know why they didn't get this money? And understand, we just talked about the idea of climate change and the idea of the fact that New Orleans sits below sea level, right? And unless there is some major infrastructure, New Orleans is going to be in a world of trouble in the next 20 to 30 years. Same with Miami, same with a lot of these places, right? Same with the Florida Keys. Anyway, Louisiana's governor-elect wants to withhold funds for New Orleans' decaying water infrastructure until women who seek abortions are prosecuted. Can someone tell me the correlation of what women's reproductive rights and abortion has to do with you fixing the water infrastructure so the people don't drown during the next hurricane, right? This is where we're at. So when we're talking about policy being implemented, that's where we're at, right? Throughout his campaign to be the next governor of Louisiana, Landry stood firmly opposed to any access to substantive abortion care for birthing people in Louisiana. Last fall, Landry personally urged the state treasurer to deny funding to any and all state-funded projects in the city of New Orleans until they enforce the abortion ban. Understand, this is a bigger conversation because when we're talking about demographics, who is a huge chunk of the population in New Orleans? Black people. There's a reason why they're specifically targeting New Orleans. It's not like they said, oh, we're going to target Lafayette. They said New Orleans, that's the place that we want. This is all strategic, and it goes and it specifically targets groups of people, right? A month later, Landry attended a public meeting throughout the Louisiana State Board Commission to purposely delay funding to multiple city improvement projects, including $35 million to the New Orleans Sewage and Water Board, as he claimed the city had thumbed its nose to the law too many times. Per local news, that funding was specifically intended for construction of an electrical substation to replace the outdated, unreliable turbines that power the city's drinking water, drainage, and sewer systems. We've seen what happens when the infrastructure is not where it needs to be, right? Let's go back to August of 2005. Hurricane Katrina, folks. So again, understand all of this crap is tied together. And so when people are kind of talking about the idea of, oh, it don't affect me, we'll be all right, we get them next time. No, these folks are already in power now. They're already doing the nonsense each and every day. And that's why no matter where you live in the United States, you need to take note of who's in charge. And not just the governor, not just the state and the Senate House, but who is your county supervisor? Who is your county sheriff? Who are the appointed and elected judges in your area? Who is sitting on the school board? Understand that the reason we even got to this entire space of the book bannings and arresting librarians and pushing all this new legislation was because a handful of people felt some kind of way and started shaking things up. Literally a handful of people. Understand that when they talk about that silent majority, there's always a really loud minority, right? And the loud minority in this group right now are conservative white folks, and they have been in here, and not even conservative, but extremely conservative, like the ones that sit on the realms of extremities, where everything is so over the top, it's not even fathomable. Like, what are you talking about? Those are the folks in charge right now. So the idea of an infrastructure project that is aimed to ensure that during the next hurricane season, when you get that surge, when you get that tide, when those winds are coming in and all of the infrastructure and all of the gadgets that we have in place to ensure that the levees don't break and everything like that are being pushed to their limits, the idea of ensuring that that stuff still works is in jeopardy because some dude is pissed off about women's reproductive rights, something that has nothing to do with this specific conversation. This is where we're at. Understand something like this will be more common as you get into a space of a Project 2025. This is why I said this is not just about whether or not Orange Man gets in office. Whether he wins or not, this is still going to get pushed through. So when we're talking about what's happening in the House, what's happening in the Senate, what's happening with these judicial appointments, it doesn't matter who's up top, right? They're going to push in each and every person that they can get in, even if it's at the local level. So when we go back to what I was talking about with the pollen floating in the air, this is the pollen, right? That random idea of, we're not going to fix the levees because, no, y'all, nope, I want the women who've been getting, abortion care, they need to be sent to jail. Until there's that, we're not worried about the levees in New Orleans. We're not worried about the sewage. We're not worried about any of that. That's the pollen floating. Okay? So I need people to understand, right? This is so much bigger than what people are making it. And a perfect example, again, of the idea, because this also goes into the idea of deregulation and the fact that corporate greed plays a huge role into the livelihood of people. This is how we got the Flint water crisis. So can we go back in time, right? So going back to this conversation of deregulation, right? Going back to Flint. Now, back in the day, of course, Flint's water source was Lake Huron, right? From the Great Lakes, big, giant lake, great water, right? People having good water. Understand the dynamics of Flint. Flint at one point was this booming city, right? Auto America is there, all kind of factories. There's just money to be made. Flint is booming. Eventually, the factories leave. Flint's economy kind of goes down. And there were a lot of industrial cities that kind of went through this same experience. So you had places like Pittsburgh. You had places like Cincinnati. You had places all over and throughout West Virginia. There were lots of towns that were industrial where as some of the industrial industries collapsed, the economies never quite rebounded. And, some would find different avenues. Some would shift over to tech, different things. But there were some places that just did not quite recover, right? And so you end up with populations that are kind of left somewhat destitute. The people are doing the best that they can. But anyway, the lovely people of Flint have been minding their business. They're getting their wonderful water from Lake Huron. Ooh, the water's so spring water, tasty, delicious, right? We can bathe in it. We can shower, right? You just go in the water and having a great time. What ends up happening, right? You have Rick Snyder. It's always somebody with the last name Snyder that got some nonsense going, right? Rick Snyder gets into office. He has a lot of really rich friends, right? And now that I'm in office, I want to make my friends richer. So we're going to start jumping into all kinds of different projects where I'm going to bring on my friends who are contractors, and they're going to get these multi-million-dollar contracts to take on these projects that nobody asked for, and it's going to make them really, really rich, but we'll paint it as the idea of, we're helping the people, right? And so one of the things was, we're wasting money getting water all the way from Lake Huron. We can just use the water right here out the Flint River. Like, yeah, it's right here. Now, understand, the Flint River has not been treated for years because when those factories were there, when you had all the runoff and the chemicals and the toxins, all of that is in the Flint River, okay? Just think about, like, for those in D.C., that, you keep seeing the people who are pressed to swim in the Anacostia River, and we be like, y'all crazy. Same thing, but that tenfold, right? So they say, so instead, we're going to do this. We're going to have a new water system. We're going to shift over the water supply to, Flint River. We're going to put in the new system that we're going to use because it's going to make my contracting friends a lot of money. They're going to get super rich off of this when we switch the water source, because we can also have them regulate the water source and then charge for it and make the people pay a whole bunch of different things. So as the water goes through the pipes, tax dollars are paying for it. We're going to get rich, right? And so they go ahead and do it. They switch the water supply from Lake Huron to, again, Flint River. Flint River has all kind of toxins and all kinds of, God knows what in there, right? What starts happening? First of all, you have this really big Legionnaires outbreak. Tons and tons of people get sick, terribly sick, right? And by the way, Snyder knew it was going to be some nonsense. So he said, let me jump ahead of the gun, right? So he creates this thing called what you call emergency manager laws, right? This would mean that, let's say the people elect someone, the people say, we want this person to be in charge of the school board, this person to be in charge of policing, this person to be the mayor. He is in a space where he can jump in and say, if he doesn't agree with who the people voted for, he can override and put in his people, which would be the emergency managers that will be put into place until he feels that things are adequate enough where possibly the elected person can now come back in and take their role. Now, understand that as he was putting in these dozens of emergency managers, they were there permanently. The people who had been elected never got to go back into their positions of power and fight against some of the nonsense that was happening, right? And so he brings in tons of election managers, right? And they're in there just messing up stuff. These are all his buddies, right? All his folks having a great time. And so people actually voted to gut that specific law. Like, we don't like this emergency managers thing. That got to go. That has to be gutted. What do you think he did? He goes back and he amends the law to make it irreversible. He said, y'all thought, get real, locked in, signed, permanent, right? So that happens. People are getting sick. Why? Because the water has everything and then some in it, to the point where every single child in Flint, Michigan has lead poisoning. And understand that lead poisoning has irreversible damage, right? It affects cognitive functions of people. It affects neurological functions. It affects the gastric functions of people, right? It is in everything, and you can't undo it. And it also plays a role into the behavior of children in the classroom. It's going to play a role into so many things. It's damage that is irreversible. This is why they go so hard against the idea of making sure like paint doesn't have lead in it. This is why, Kamala Harris and her team, they do a terrible job of promoting this or talking about it, but that's been one of the main projects that she took on once, the Biden administration was put in office, was going and replacing all the lead pipes in America, including the pipes in Flint, right? I think it's still an ongoing thing. That was also a piece of the conversation around the infrastructure bill. Sometimes people need to learn how to promote the things that they're doing well, because again, when you're constantly just getting hit with, you suck, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, but you guys are never talking about what you actually do, right? Of course, everybody thinks everything you do sucks, right? But anyway, said all that to say, right? The city council is over this crap. They vote 7-1 to switch the water source back to Lake Huron. But let me tell you something that's interesting with that. Even if they were to switch the water source back to Lake Huron, at this point, all of the pipes are contaminated. And even with that nice fresh water from Lake Huron coming in, everything is still contaminated. The water's still going to have all the problems with it. You now have to replace every single pipe in the city. But don't worry about it, because guess what? Snyder overrode the city council and said, we ain't switching nothing back. This is what it's going to be. So the emergency managers overruled the city council and said, y'all are going to keep that water. So that water stayed, right? Now, again, this water had not been treated. This water had all kinds of problems with it. Eventually, the water would be shifted back years later. And we saw that there were indictments, but everybody got off. Everybody got a slap on the wrist, and folks kept moving. And that definitely affected all of the people in Flint. And this is why when we're talking about the idea of people moving like there's always going to be a next time, for the people of Flint, who did nothing wrong, who did everything they were supposed to do. They were politically active. They spoke out. They went to the meetings. They voted against different things. But the higher powers that be already had enough of their fingers into what you call that pot of power, where they could just screw over things and nothing could be done because there was no way to hold regulation or hold them accountable over anything. And they were able to make the people of Flint collateral to their nonsense, right? And so the damage had already been done. And so for the people of Flint, even though you switched the water back, understand now the pipes that are in your house are also corroded. Those have to be switched out. It costs anywhere between $3,000 and $16,000 to replace all the pipes in somebody's house, depending on the size of the house and the kind of pipes that they have. If we're talking about the median income of people that live in Flint, that's $21,725. That's as of 2022. And understand that's actually higher than 2014 when it was a bigger issue. So when people are always like, well, the people of Flint could have just moved. They really couldn't, because they couldn't sell their homes. The homes were deemed invaluable until those pipes were fixed. And because Flint at that point in time is a place where there's not a big job market, there's not a lot of wealth, people aren't rushing to move to Flint, especially because everybody knows there's a national water crisis, right? And so unfortunately, those people of Flint, that conversation that we have where people are like, well, we'll just move and, we'll take care of it next time. They're living in the next time. right? Next time never came. They have to just live with whatever is there and figure it out. And understand that it's not limited to Flint. You're seeing this happen all over the country, especially when we're talking about the conversation of deregulation. Deregulation is the conversation that makes a lot of very wealthy people even richer. Understand that something like a Project 2025 and a lot of what's being pushed by a lot of these really crazy, extreme politicians that should not be in office, they're going to be putting things into play that will affect us years down the line. You may think you're exempt because maybe you live in a city that doesn't have it, but understand this stuff is going to find its way around, right? Because what ends up happening, if there's a specific case, right? So let's just say there's a random case all the way in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, some small case. I don't know. This is some kind of case in relation to, affirmative action, even though it's already gutted, right? That small case in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, is something that can find its way up through the court system, get into the state Supreme Court, shift its way over to the federal courts, find its way in our Supreme Court. Supreme Court makes a new law of the land, and now everything spreads to everybody and it's affected. That's how we've gotten into the space that we're in now in regard to affirmative action, right? You saw things happen at UNC Chapel Hill and Harvard, where there's the different lawsuits brought on by, of course, Edward Blum and his folks, somebody that we've been talking about. Please go back and watch my Edward Blum video. But, again, a guy who was pissed and pressed about the fact that he lost an election back in 1996 has a vendetta against everybody, and he's been pushing it. And look at how much law has been affected on a national scale since 1996, and really since 2013. We've watched affirmative action get gutted. We've watched Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act get gutted in 2013. We're seeing all these different things, right? And so understand all of this is tied together. Going back to regulation, I'm going to read one more article piece, and then I'm going to take a break because I've been talking for like an hour. And this is funny because this story literally ties to something I was talking to you guys about on my Whoopi Goldberg video when she was, that was the video where it was a conversation of millennials and Gen Z. We just don't work hard enough. That's why we can't afford a house, when in reality, inflation is going up 641% since 1979. And the cost of housing, we'd be here all day. Just go watch that video. Anyway, Feds raid corporate landlord, escalating nationwide criminal probe into rent increases. Over the last 4 years, rents have skyrocketed by an average of over 30% nationwide and are a major factor in the overall inflation rate. There are a variety of factors behind the increases, including an overall housing shortage, but the Department of Justice is investigating another potential case, a massive criminal conspiracy among large landlords. Last month, the FBI reportedly conducted an unannounced raid of Cortland Management, a major corporate landlord based in Atlanta. The surprise search appears to be a part of the Department of Justice criminal investigation, first reported by Politico in March, into an alleged scheme among many corporate landlords to artificially increase rents through collusion. The investigation centers around the use of RealPage, advanced property management software used by many corporate landlords. Following a 2022 expose by ProPublica, RealPage and landlords that uses the software have been named as defendants in multiple class action lawsuits, as well as actions filed by attorney generals of Arizona and Washington, D.C. Now, on that Whoopi video, didn't I tell you about RealPage in Washington, D.C.? This is where I live, so I'm going to talk about my city for a minute, and how there are 14 major landlords in Washington, D.C. that are a part of this same lawsuit, and they represent over 60,000 properties in regard to units in D.C., right? And so anybody who has lived in one of these 14 properties between 2016 and 2022 paid an average of rent at a rate 5 to 7% higher than everything else, right? Which makes it even funnier. If you've been following me for a long time, if you remember my old place, like people thought I haven't moved, but this is not the same place I was living in like 2 years ago. If you haven't noticed, like this is a room back here. My old spot looked just like this, but this was a window and it stopped. But that leads to my sunroom. So the old apartment was under a landlord that is a part of that lawsuit, which was W.C. Smith, right? And now this landlord as well is that I live in right now is under that lawsuit as a part of what was happening with RealPage. Who owns this building again? I forgot who owns this building. It's some nonsense. Let me see real quick. I gotta make sure I got this right. Who owns my building? I don't forgot. I just know it's some scammer that then took all our money anyway. Why don't I see it on here? Somebody here owns this building. Hold on, I'm gonna get this right because I need to say my 2 cents on here. Dang it, either way, this building is part of the lawsuit. There's that. That's the point that I'm making. Dang, man. I'm still mad at this building anyway because of some other stuff. I told you about the situation with my car. But long story short, oh, Paradigm, that's the company that owns this building. Paradigm is also mentioned in that lawsuit. So again, I've been paying 5 to 7% more in rent since 2016. That's 8 years of paying extra money I didn't have to pay, because here's the thing. RealPage is pretty much the software that has an algorithm, and it's an algorithm that has all the properties communicate. And all it takes is one building to say, I'm going to raise my rent price from $1,900 to $2,400. And the next building is like, because it's all the software talking to each other, the next building is like, well, they have the same things we have. They just went from 19 to 24. We're going to do the same. Then they go to 24. And then the next building is like, well, we were at 18. We're going to act like we're doing people a favor. We're going to go to 23. And before you know it, all the properties are skyrocketing and raising their rents. And then what happens? The next year comes, and you know these buildings love to raise their rent each time people renew their lease. Now they go from 23 to, okay, well, we don't want to do too much. Let's go up 150. And the next building's like, well, we're going to go up 250. We're going up 400. We're going way up. We're going to get rid of affordable dwelling units, so nobody that's on any kind of subsidized program can live here. And before you know it, the rent gets higher and higher and higher and higher. Fast forward, you have 60,000 units in DC that are way overpriced. People are paying $3,000 for a one-bedroom apartment that's only 500 square feet, right? And you're seeing this happen in Arizona, and now it's happening in Atlanta. One of the reasons, like, think back. Remember when everybody used to say, move to Atlanta, it's affordable there. And now people are kind of saying that about Houston, like, go to Houston. Houston's where all the money's at. You can have a great job. And people in Houston are like, please stop coming here. You're making our rents go up. That's what we've seen happen with Atlanta with rent. How rent has skyrocketed. Again, the idea of deregulation, the idea of corporate greed, the idea of putting in software that kind of looks at the marketing trends and decides this is the time to raise rents. Not because the buildings have gotten better, not because the buildings have new amenities, not because the buildings have all these great services, but just because the computer said so. And because their computer said so, our computer said so, your computer said so, let's all raise the rent, we all get rich, and the people are paying this buku amount of money for buildings that are old and already paid for, that don't even rely on a mortgage anymore. They're just living off the residuals, and the people that live in these units have to pay an arm and a leg to live in some raggedy buildings that are some nonsense, right? Like, that is crazy. That's where we're living. So understand, all of this stuff is cemented. It affects everybody to some extent. This is so much bigger than just who's sitting in the Oval Office. Like, all of this trickles down. Anyway, I've said a mouthful. I'm going to take a break and read some comments. There's no way I'm going to get to all of y'all. I'm sorry. So I'm going to read as many as I can, but we got to keep going. Anyway. The Most High said the Electoral College makes my vote worthless. The Electoral College got to go too, because what happens with the Electoral College is, you know, somebody living in a place like Wyoming, their vote carries more weight in an Electoral College than somebody who lives in California. So the idea of the Electoral College, that thing has got to go too, right? But unfortunately, because that system is there, you can't get rid of the Electoral College until you have enough people that buy into the idea of getting rid of it, right? Because again, Republicans have lost 7 of the last 8 popular votes, but they've gotten to a lot of the elections. We watched Bush win in 2000. We watched, there's just election after election where Republicans lose the popular vote, but still win, right? Sometimes. So like, understanding you would have to get enough people in positions of power that are like, yeah, electoral vote needs to go. Let's get back to the space of one person, one vote. But again, when you have people like an Edward Blum, where again, that was one of the lawsuits he had in the state of Texas, where he tried to eliminate the idea of one person, one vote. The idea of saying corporations are people too. The idea of even drawing districts based on only the people that vote and not the people that live in the district. That was his lawsuit. He had a lawsuit where he was like, I want it set up where you're going to draw the congressional districts based on how many eligible voters are in the district and not how many people are there. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because, one, children cannot vote. They represent a huge portion of the people living in a district, right? You have people that may have been convicted of a felony that cannot vote. Doesn't mean they did it. We already know 96% of people that have a federal felony took a plea agreement, or actually 97%, right? So we have lots of people who are convicted felons, right, that can no longer vote. You have all these people who lose their right to vote for really silly nonsensical things, right? And so that would pretty much erase the voice of a lot of people that represent these different populations. And really what it would do is, again, it would give gains to people that share his same viewpoints, and people that are not as marginalized would carry more weight within their congressional districts as they draw these maps. So again, all of this stuff is tied together. All right. Hey, Bibby said, yep, next up, freedom of speech. That's already in the mix anyway, right? That even goes back to the idea of when Orange Man was still in office, and back in 2018, right before we got into the election, he said one of the things he wanted to do was any federal agency or federal institute that was being federally funded that did not uplift and support the idea of the founding fathers would automatically lose federal funding. That means, so a place like an HBCU that's federally funded, now there's only one of those, that's Howard. Howard would have had to get rid of all of their history programs. And y'all got to get rid of that. Y'all can't talk about, all that. Nope, that has to go. You can talk about how great the founding fathers were, but you will not sit here and start talking about no Jim Crow. Not on our watch, right? Okay. Let's see. Avocado Queen said the political parties are one corporate party wearing two heads in different makeup. I do see them as big corporate parties, but at this point, the crazy extremists have all latched onto the GOP side because they have more leverage on that side. And the reason why is because Republicans don't need the vote of anybody but white America. They can win an election with specifically the white vote. The Democrat side, because they serve as the umbrella for everybody else, they need the votes of all these different groups of people. So they can't have the Marjorie Taylor Greens on their end because they can't afford to lose the black vote. They can't afford to lose more of the young vote. They can't afford to lose 2/3 of the Latino vote. They can't afford to lose, the vote of those that identify as LGBTQ plus. Like, they can't afford all that. GOP doesn't care. It doesn't bring all the crazy folks on this side. So yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Bolbert, Jim Jordan, Lindsey Graham, all y'all come on. Having a good time on that. Hey, they ain't got nothing to worry about. They can put whatever lunatic they want in office and people will rally behind it, all in the name of anti-blackness, right? So that, to me, is where you see the difference, right? Right. So because Democrats definitely need the vote of additional groups of people, even if they are the worst things walking on the planet, they still need those votes. So they don't get the luxury of latching into the same kind of nonsense, right? So there's somewhat of a difference. But no, a lot of these people are bought out because I tell you right now, you pull up APAC, you're gonna see D's and R's next to everybody, right? All these folks getting checks. I was so disappointed when I saw Warnock was getting money from APAC and big money, $900,000. I said, why? Hakeem Jeffries, $1.4 million. Why? What are y'all doing? What are you doing? No, that's not how this is supposed to work. Make it make sense. No Name Face at Galveston, Texas. Yes, another hurricane-prone city, right? Right on the water, right on the beachfronts. All right. All right, I'm trying to zip through. I can't get to everybody's comment because I have so many other things I want to cover. So please forgive me if I don't get to your comment. All right. Jules, he said, if you think things are bad now, just you wait. And that's the other thing. I think like Americans have had the luxury of, we're in this space where a lot of people move with our politics with the idea or the guise of we're just always going to be okay. And I think that's because, again, as crazy as things are in this country, it's still a privilege to live in this country. No matter how terrible things are, no matter how much anti-blackness is there are some things that in the United States collectively, we as a country don't deal with in the same way that other places do. Famine is not really a conversation here. There are people that go hungry. There are people who are not well fed. There are people who, are not getting the nutrition that they need. But there's no such thing as a famine where you turn on the world news and they're like, oh, 2 million people in the United States died of hunger today. That's not our experience, right? We don't really have to worry about the idea of invasions of other countries because of our location. It's very hard to invade this country because, you got to go across the ocean to get to us unless Canada decides we've had it with y'all. We coming down there to straighten things up. And we already gave a call to Mexico and they coming up too. We getting y'all from both sides. Unless that's really happening, we don't have to really deal with the idea of invasions from other countries and people coming and bombing us and sending drones and we're walking to school and all of a sudden you get blown into pieces. Now, other places have to deal with that all the time at the hands of our country, but we don't really have to deal with that, right? The idea of, massive illness as a result of food. Yeah, we have recalls. Yeah, every now and then there's an E. coli outbreak and everything like that. But there is not this massive situation where it's like a black plague where, the water supply was so contaminated that millions of Americans are dying by the month, right? We're not living in a space where there's 60 to 70% unemployment. We're not living in a place where the illiteracy rate is like 80%. We're not living in a place where even when you talk about the unhoused population, yes, there is about 2% of our population that is unhoused, 1.7%. And as terrible as that is, there are places in the world where that number is at 40%. And I think because those kind of things are not as prevalent to a lot of people that live here, people always move and think that everything is okay. We're just doing okay. And so what ends up happening is folks are like, well, things ain't too bad. They ain't too bad. And as they say that, the goalpost as to what qualifies or what serves as the threshold of being too bad gets pushed further and further to its extremity and to its limit. So if we look back, if you were to take somebody from the year 2000 and bring them into 2024 and say, hey, this is the America you live in, they would be like, what the f is this? What is going on? Whoa, wait a minute. Hold on, wait a minute. Why are all the houses, why is the median cost for a house right now $430,000? Oh my gosh. Okay, why is state tuition? Why? Oh my God, this is like $17,000 a year. It was like $6,000. What is going on here? Why are people that are endorsed by Nazis and the Klan currently in office? They were in office then, but it was secretive. They weren't so open about it. What do you mean somebody stormed the White House? They did what? Oh, wait, the president the president has 4 cases. What kind of is going on up in here? Okay, interesting. Oh, they got rid of affirmative action? Really? What? Wait, there's abortion bans at 6 weeks? People don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. Whew, okay, all right. Interesting. So again, as we continue to live with time, these crazy extremities and these crazy things that keep taking place, they become normalized and we're just used to them. And so as things get worse, because we're just used to living in a constant state of chaos, but it's not the same kind of chaos like the chaos I mentioned when I gave those examples, a lot of people move with the idea of, oh, we're going to be all right. We're going to be good. We're fine. Because again, there's always the promise of tomorrow for a lot of people. But eventually that promise is not going to be there in the same capacity that it is now. And unfortunately, by the time people realize that, it's going to be too far gone, too late, right? And that's the scary aspect, right? So that's why I keep saying, unless you have some really big money, and I'm talking big money, not $200,000 or $300,000 that you make a year, that ain't enough. I'm talking big money, enough where, you know, you can buy your way out of anything. Because again, also, if the GOP decides to gut Social Security, for those baby boomers that are going into retirement, y'all are done for. And that also means Gen X is done for because there won't even be any for them to begin with. You know, millennials, don't worry about it. None for you, none for Gen X, none for Gen Alpha. And what works against Gen Alpha, Gen X, and millennials is these are the 3 groups that don't have the same amount of money into savings because so much of their money goes into expenses. Because again, rent is like 3 times what it was 30 years ago. So you have a lot of millennials, Gen X, and those that are in Gen Alpha old enough to pay for their own bills at this point, where they don't have the same amount of cash flow and there's more money going out to expenses versus the money that they're saving and building, versus somebody who might have been a baby boomer who had a pension because they worked at whatever factory for, 30 or 40 years way back when, and they had a pension that was built up. They had their 401k that was built up, and they watched the economy grow and grow and grow, and they're sitting on, $600,000 or $700,000, maybe $800,000 of money that, has grown in their 401k, right? And in addition to that, they bought their home in the 70s for $50,000 or $60,000. Maybe they bought their house in the 80s for about $100,000, if that. And now that house is worth, depending on where they live, if you live in DC and you have an 1,200 square foot house off Rhode Island Avenue, Northeast or Northwest, you can probably get that house appraised for $800,000 or $900,000, especially if it's been flipped, right? Especially if you have a yard. If you live further up, like by Woodley Park, by the zoo, off Van Ness, all those areas. If you own property over there, you can get upwards of $1 million for your property, right? So millennials don't have that. A lot of Gen X is not going to have that. Gen Z certainly doesn't have that because they're just starting into adulthood. Gen X is just getting out of college, right? And so that idea of thinking everything will just be okay, the conversation is going to vary based on generation, based on your race, based on the socioeconomic bubble in which you come from and the one that you're trying to climb into. Like, understand we are living in a very interesting time. And the crazy part is a lot of this, again, is rooted in anti-Blackness. The rage that people have about Black folks existing has stirred up a lot of this, right? Especially when we're talking about white rage and the rage that exists of working poor white Americans that have the power to undo a lot of the shenanigans. But the fear of people who look like myself being in a position where I may have more than them pisses them off because they feel like somebody like myself should not have anything, especially in a space where we lived in a country where there was policy implemented that ensured that people who look just like me, who come from that same lineage, coming out of American chattel slavery and through Jim Crow and through sharecropping, with all the programs that were created and the laws that were created to ensure that we couldn't have housing, couldn't have jobs, adequate health care, that we would live in food deserts, that all these different things, whether it be the judicial system or the prison industrial complex, all these things that work against us, when they see somebody like myself who's not doing too bad, that pisses them off. And they say, you know what, we're not strict enough. This system still isn't working because I'm supposed to have what that person has. I should not be living, below the poverty line because look, I'm not them. I'm this. Everything he has is what I'm supposed to have. So I'm going to constantly get behind every politician who runs on a campaign that says, those are the bad guys. Those are the people that are taking everything from you. The reason you're not prospering is because of those people and their handouts and them robbing the system and them draining the welfare and them getting the affirmative action and the DEI programs and the CRT, and they didn't earn it, and the woke this and the woke that. And before you know it, again, these people flock and they rush. And who do they put in office? They put in Marjorie Taylor Greene. They put in Jim Jordan. They put in Marco Rubio. They put in just some of the stupidest people, right? Because this is bigger. This is not even just about Republican and Democrat, but it's also just noticing the people that are coming into power aren't even rational. You're putting in people that are just lunatics. Like, are y'all serious? So there's that. All right. Where are we at here? Zen, you said even before abortion was legal, women were finding ways of getting them done. The reversal of the law will not stop abortions. That will be for wealthy people that can find ways to, that have the money to fly somewhere and go get it, right? I suggest a lot of you guys go. There's a documentary, and I talked about Dawn Porter on the last live. She's the one who is the director of the Luther Vandross documentary that's coming out next year. She has a documentary called Trapped, which goes into the story of people who ended up in situations where they were pregnant. So there's like a situation where there's an 11-year-old girl who was the victim of sexual assault, and now she's pregnant. But at the time, Texas was passing like an HB2 law that was going to outlaw the idea of abortions. And how that would operate was that any kind of clinic in the state of Texas that did not have what you call release rights to a nearby hospital could not perform the services. And at the time, the governing power had put in some kind of law where it made it illegal for those clinics to have release rights to any kind of major hospital. So people had to leave the state of Texas to go and get these procedures done. But depending on the socioeconomic bubble or the wealth of some of these people, they didn't have the money to go and do those kind of things. Very interesting documentary. I suggest you kind of watch that. That kind of ties into the conversation of what really happens. Because understand, even with abortion being banned, the people who want to get it, that can afford it, they can go and do it. But you're also seeing laws where in Idaho, where it's like, the college professors can sue if a student misses class because they went to another state to go have a procedure, and now they can sue. And you've seen other situations where they're making it illegal for people to leave the state and go and get some of these procedures done. So they will find a way to punish the people that they want to punish. But the super wealthy, the super rich will continue to, live their best life. That's why I said, if you got big money, you don't really have much to worry about with any of this. Your life will not be affected. It's the everyday people who are going to be collateral to all of this. Right? Anyway. Let's see here. Skip Franz Jr. said, it's only inevitable if Trump wins. And even if Trump were to lose, I really want people to understand that their work does not stop. If you follow me on Twitter, I always tweet their work is never done. Their work is never done. They're going to constantly keep working on things, whether Trump is in office or not. Even if Trump does not win, the ideologies, the movement, the energy behind what it is he's been able to create is not going anywhere. We're still going to be dealing with a whole bunch of lunatics and crazy folks that are going to come in afterward, right? It hasn't stopped it. So this is an ongoing, politics, like I said earlier in this video, is an ongoing thing. It's live. I think a lot of people think policy is just something it's locked in, it's signed, and we move on. No, it's a constant effort. You're constantly working on something. It's kind of like if you're somebody that goes to the gym, right? You start going to the gym and you're pumping iron. Ooh, I look good. Look, I can make my chest jump. Ooh, okay, and everything, right? And so you look great. But when you stop working out, right? You stop going. Or maybe you take 5 weeks off. When you try to go back in there, you don't do that same set with ease the way you did 5 weeks earlier because you haven't worked out for 5 weeks. Or let's say you just totally stop working out, right? Body starts changing. All them pecs that set up high starting to sag. You start to get some little moves there, right? You're not getting the same kind of upper body strength. And, you don't look as good as you used to look to in your beach attire, right? Same kind of thing. That's how politics are. It's something that has to constantly, it's draining, unfortunately, because there's an election every year. This is bigger than just the 4-year elections. Understand that every single year, there are federal, state, and local elections. In your state, wherever you live, there's always something going on. It's not something that just stops. So in the same way, and I said this back in 2020 when everybody started parading because Biden got in. I already said Biden was a business as usual candidate anyway, right? I had been saying that. Okay, that's who we got. That's who we got. Cool. But people were parading in the streets. I get it. Folks were happy Orange Man was out. But I was like, that's not, you understand, we're in for it. Stuff ain't about to change. This is going to be an ongoing process. You're going to see the crazy really come out. And the crazy has really come out in the last 4 years, right? To the point where here we are going into November, and there's a chance that the very crazy that y'all thought y'all got rid of is back tenfold and has a very viable chance of getting into office. I don't think Orange Man is going to win, but who knows? Anything is possible, right? So that's where we're at. Man, we're still only on the first topic, y'all. Man, okay. Let me keep going. Exactly, Bonita Gardner. It's going to affect people for decades. Yes, decades. Okay, let me get to the bottom of this really quick. Let me see here. So Alan Lewis said, up here in Washington State, rent is so expensive. Exactly. Miss Nocturnal 09 said, well, where have the Dems been during all this gutting? Acting like they care, but doing nothing. All these politicians are paid by the same billionaires. Again, there's not a one size fits all conversation to this, but we can look back. Look at what happened with Tennessee, right? Remember when we talked about what was happening at the local level in Tennessee and how the legislature was like majority Republican anyway, and the few Democrats that kept trying to fight against things, they were getting censured. You saw two. What are the two names? Let me pull up their names really quick. Remember, they were the two that were voted out of office, not by the people, but by the state house and legislature, right? Hold on, I'm gonna find this video real quick. It was, and y'all can put it in the chat if you want. These are the two politicians. Well, it was three of them. It was the white woman and the two black guys. They let the white woman come back in, but the two black guys had to run for re-election to get their positions back. That was, come on. Where is it at? I know I did a video on it. Was this before or after I was dragging that person? I think it was after that person. Tennessee. I know. Let me type it behind. Let me search myself. Calvin Michaels. Tennessee. Here we go. Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, right? Two elected officials in the state of Tennessee. They try to go against the grain with different things, and the GOP people in power voted them out of their own positions. So it's not even about, I totally agree with the fact that there's a lot of people who are bought out by these billionaires and you can't really depend on them for anything. But you also have people that are actually trying to do the work. And guess who's working against them tenfold? Right? Look at, even this is more so symbolic. It wasn't really about policy, but even with the Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, the idea of just seeing how the rules move in the chambers, how exceptions are given to Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Jasmine is punished, right? The same kind of nonsense. So it's definitely bigger than that. And then again, the other issue, I've been saying this, you have a lot of people who are running that really aren't, they're really not specifically in the party that they're running for. They infiltrate a party, run as the face of that party, and switch parties. That's one of the things that happened in the state of Louisiana, right? And then even when we're talking the House and the Senate, when you want to talk about Sinema and Manchin, what did Sinema do? Sinema got in there as a Democrat, ran, and I'm for the people. Got in the way of everything. Lots of policy that would have really helped people. She voted no on almost everything that people needed. Same thing with Manchin. And because Democrats at that time really had a slim majority, you needed every vote. The two of them voted no on everything. Now, what is Manchin now? He is no longer a Democrat, right? And what is Sinema? She is no longer a Democrat, right? So you also have people who jump in and infiltrate and get in the way. So politics is tricky, right? And this is why I don't look at it as like once something happens, I'm checked out and after everybody else, I don't care no more, because it's like, I would love to do that, but especially after working in the nonprofit realm and seeing just how different my work would shift depending on who was in power, I just can't sit out and be removed anymore. I recognize the idea that there's a lot of nonsense, but I'm at a space where what leverage can I get out of the people that are in office? Whether I like them or not, what leverage is there? And if there is none, who can I find that I can get a little bit more leverage with? I might not get everything that I want, but dang it, at least in the conversation of harm reduction, who is doing the least damage right now until we can get somebody that's better? And again, this even goes back to the conversation of third party. Now, I've been saying this since 2018. I said back in 2018, that was the time to push the idea of a third party candidate for the time we're in now. And what annoys me is now people are jumping out talking about third party. And I'm like, the election is in like 5 months. It's too late for third party. That doesn't work now, right? And on top of that, a lot of times, a lot of these third party candidates are not even on every ballot in every state. It's a waste of a vote. So getting behind a third party candidate that's only on 12 state ballots, Why? They can't win, right? So that's kind of the nonsense that we're under. And so that's why I'm just like, again, now listen, this is 2024. If we want to have the conversation of third party, the time right now is to start thinking about 2036, right? Understand, policy is a long game. In the same way that Republicans wanted to get rid of Roe v. Wade, they were pissed when Roe v. Wade became a thing in the 70s. They said, we got something for y'all. And they worked on it for decades and decades. And here we are, 2023, surprise, or maybe 2022, surprise, gutted, right? Here we are. So that's kind of how that works. But again, my conversation with regard to third party, because I personally don't believe that there's going to be a third party candidate anytime soon that can get 70 or 80 million Americans to vote and take out one of the two major parties. My idea with the idea of third party is using the third party to build a coalition that has enough representation, anywhere between about 18 to 30 million people, that are willing to say, this entire third party will not get behind that party unless they do this. So using one of the two major parties to get leverage with what it is that you want, specifically, most likely the Democrat side. Republicans don't care. They're not budging. But if you can get a coalition of like 18 to 30 million people, let's just say you get 20 million people. 20 million is enough to sway an election. It's not enough to win on your own with 20 million. But if you have 20 million that say, if you guys can promise that this is what's going to happen, we will get behind you. If not, good luck. Understand that shifts a whole lot of things, because 20 million people to one of the major two parties gives that major party pretty much a monopoly over everything. That's how I look at the idea of third party. I think people look at third party like, let's put in the third party candidate and they'll take over. And then my other concern with third party as well is, just because they're third party doesn't mean they're a good candidate. We have that issue as well. Like, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, third party, get behind them. And then they don't even have good policy. They got some nonsense. Yeah, they speak the language of the people who are annoyed with the major two parties, but they don't have any real policy. They don't have anything. Like, so it's a very layered conversation, you know? All right. Demetrius said rent is high everywhere. It certainly is, and it's ridiculous, right? Y'all are having a ball in this chat. I wish I could get to everybody, but there's just not enough time, right? Y'all are going in. I love it. Let me see here. Exactly. Bonita Gardner said Joe Manchin really messed things up, and they kill me with that. Well, what I can't stand is then they do the whole respectability thing. A lot of these people are terrible people anyway, and then, but they'll pretend that they care about the people. Like, I'm over it. All right. Tyler Hackman said people B-word and moan, but don't vote in the primaries. And that's another thing. Like, that's why, yeah, primaries and the caucuses and everything like that, like, pay attention to those, especially the ones that are open, where even listen, if there's an open Republican caucus or primary, even if you're not a Republican, I would suggest voting in that if it's specifically for them. If you know that they have some crazy, we're going to put everybody back in concentration camps kind of candidate, and then you have the more moderate Republican. They may not have all of your policy, but they're not as crazy. At least vote in that caucus to make sure that crazy Nazi person doesn't get in. And at least when it gets down to the bigger election between that moderately level-headed Republican and whatever person is on the Democrat side, at least they're not as big of a threat as the Nazi person. Like, using your leverage to make this work. Because listen, understand, these parties are being infiltrated on both ends from different people that are trying to disrupt things. So it's like jump 10 steps ahead of the game, right? All right. The Most High said, with all due respect, what is your opinion on leaving the country? I'm planning on leaving soon due to the high cost of living and not being able to afford healthcare. No, I don't want to go. I don't want to go anywhere. I mean, for people who want to do it, go ahead. My lineage is here. My family is here. I've lived abroad. You're not going to be able to escape anti-blackness. It's going to be everywhere. But no, I totally understand people who do want to go and leave or do whatever. But for me, this is home. So, you know, I'm going to ride this thing till the wheels fall off. We're going to get it right. Right? That's where I'm at. But I get it. Everybody has what it is that they want to do. I just personally don't see myself moving and living in another country permanently. Who knows? If I had some big money, maybe I got a house in another country and I live with a dual citizenship. But for me, there is an experience of Black America that I love that you can't get anywhere else. And I wouldn't want to lose that because I'm frustrated with how high rent is, or I'm frustrated with certain things. But to each his own. Everybody should be able to do what it is that they want. But for me, I love just that cohort of like Black spaces, Black America. It's one of the reasons why I haven't left DC yet, because I love this area. I love the culture. I love the people. There's just so many things that I appreciate about this area. It makes it really, really hard to leave, even though I am long overdue to pack my things and move to a city that's a bit closer to a lot of the things that I want to do. But I love this city. Like, this is where I've been for my entire adulthood, and this city has been so good to me. And it's like, no, I don't want to go. But, you know, everybody has to do what they need to do. Okay, we have to keep going because we are so far behind. And I still got a few other people to drag. But all right, I'm going to actually go right into Fearless Fund because this kind of ties into what it is we've already been talking about. All right, I need more water on this one. I'm going to skip the tea. All right, Edward Blum again, people. I'm about sick of this man. I'm sick of this man. A grant program for Black women business owners is discriminatory. Federal Appeals Court rules. The message these judges sent today is that diversity in corporate America, education, and anywhere else should not exist, said Fearless Fund founder and CEO Arian Simone in a statement. A federal appeals court has ruled that the Fearless Fund grant program for Black women business owners is discriminatory. The judges ruled that the Fearless Fund's Fearless Strivers Grant Contest is substantially likely to violate the provisions of Title 42 of the U.S. Code, which ensures equal rights under the law and prohibits the use of race when awarding and enforcing contracts, CNN reports. The case against the Atlanta-based venture capital fund began last year with a lawsuit by the American Alliance for Equal Rights. That's one of Edward Blum's groups, right? The lawsuit, led by Edward Blum, who is known for challenging affirmative action in college admissions, alleged that the fund, which specifically caters to Black women, is racially discriminatory. However, a significant racial gap exists in venture capital funding, with Black women businesses receiving less than 1% of the $288 billion invested by venture capital firms in 2022. Monday's 2-1 decision was a reversal from last year's ruling by a federal judge, which ruled that the contest should be able to continue because, based on their opinion, the lawsuit was expected to fail. But since October, this program has been suspended after a different separate panel of federal appeals court swiftly granted Blum's request for an emergency injunction while he challenged the federal judge's original order. The message these judges sent today is that diversity in corporate America, education, or anywhere else should not exist, said the Fearless Fund founder and CEO Arian Simone in a statement. These judges bought what small group of white men were selling. In this fearless moment, we should all be motivated to fight after today's decision. This is devastating for the Fearless Fund and Foundation and for the women which we have invested, Simone added. I am shattered for every girl of color who has a dream but will grow up in a nation determined not to give her a shot or to live it. On their behalf, we will turn the pain into purpose and fight with all of our might. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper because now there's a video I've done on Fearless Fund. Just to give some context, this is in the conversation of venture capital, right? Or venture capitalism, right? Let me make sure I got my notes on here. Make sure I'm getting this all right. Okay, and so what this is about, whenever somebody has a business idea, right? I'm gonna make up somebody. Let's say Dominique, right? Dominique loves the idea of game night, right? And so she creates this company that has all these cool games for people to play, in their home. So she has a domino brand and she has board games and all kind of games that she's made up. And so she wants investors to help her, put money into her business so that it can grow and go from being a mom and pop where maybe she has an Instagram page and people can order the material off the Instagram to industry where there's corporate money behind it and she can get major distribution in stores. So now her products are being sold in Targets nationwide. It's being sold in Walmarts nationwide. It's now being sold in international markets. And now you can buy these items in the UK. You can buy these items in Belize. You can buy these in Australia. You can buy these in Japan. That's where the conversation of venture capital comes in. So think of like the show Shark Tank, where people have a business idea and they need money from a bigger company that has money that they want to put into companies. And with venture capital, a lot of times they'll put money into a smaller company and, they're going to get their little piece of the change on the back end. I'm going to give you this much for 10% of your company, so on and so forth. That's venture capitalism. Now, in this conversation, before Fearless Fund was a thing, businesses owned by Black women got 0.0006% of all venture capital funding. Now, remember how the article just said there was $288 billion that was being given out to companies. Black women, they were getting 0.0006% of that. Fearless Fund came in, and that number rose to 0.39%. So that's 0.39% of 1%, right? That's where we're at. And understand, what they had were just these $20,000 grants that would go to different businesses. $20,000 sounds like a lot, but $20,000 really isn't a lot of money, right? When I told you guys about my experience doing jury duty on the last live, and the guy was suing his former employer for his bonus was way more than $20,000. So this is play money, right? Businesses, $20,000 is not a lot, but it is seed money, right? And so long story short, Edward Blum, who feels some kind of way, decided, oh no, this is discriminatory specifically against the Asian community. That was his argument. Asian business owners should be able to get a piece of this money. And so this goes back to the idea of how people will fight to maintain a status quo. $288 billion being given to businesses, and Black folks are left out, period. And when we talk about Black women, they're really left out. So other Black women get together and say, let's try to do something to help those in our community, because they tell us we need to pull ourselves up by the bootstrap. They tell us to not ask for handouts. They tell us we're not working hard enough. They tell us to invest in ourselves. They tell us you just have to believe it to achieve it. They tell us there's not racism in this country. They tell us we're all afforded the same 24 hours. They tell us that there's equality there and anything else is reverse discrimination and you're just making excuses, so stop whining and make it happen. So Black people make it happen, and guess what? As soon as we make it happen, and we haven't even shook the table really, we're still at the bare minimum, $20,000 here and there, it finds its way all the way up into the court system. So this is eventually going to the Supreme Court. To me, that is crazy. That goes back to, again, the idea of maintaining the status quo. They don't want us to gain anything, right? So now you're pressed about this little tiny pocket of wealth that's not even really wealth. This is really people putting their funds together and trying to help a few folks get afloat. And you want to gut that and say it's discriminatory against all these other people, when in reality, Black folks are told no with everything, right? This even goes back, I swallowed that water hard. I think you heard that in the mic. This even goes back to the conversation around when the last administration had the opportunity zones, right? And it was marketed and presented as, oh, this is helping Black people. This is going to help Black businesses. But what were the stipulations in that law? I also did a video on that. That's the one. I think Lil Wayne is in the title, but look that one up too. One of the stipulations in the law, this was something where businesses that would open a business in what would be deemed the opportunity zones, these often were the destitute areas of the country where you had the working poor, there wasn't a lot of wealth, there wasn't a lot of money, there was there wasn't really any investment. A lot of the pockets where the poverty existed, those were all deemed as opportunity zones. What was the stipulation? The stipulation was, in order for, well, one, if a company opened in that zone, they get big giant tax breaks, right? And it would give them, there was additional money coming in from the government to help them get on their feet. But one of the stipulations was you already had to have your business established. You had to have a building already. You already had to have a certain amount of staff. There were a bunch of different things that automatically cut out most mom and pop businesses, that automatically cut out most Black entrepreneurs, and instead corporations moved in. And so the majority of the businesses that were created in these opportunity zones were in the hospitality business. So again, this is developing, this is creating the condos, this is creating hotels, this is the shopping centers with franchises that don't really contribute much to the community from a cultural standpoint. It's just more so the idea of maintaining that corporate business model where, yeah, let's open another Subway over here. Let's open another Starbucks. So it's all these things that don't have much of a cultural significance in the area. And there was no stipulation in the law that said when you move into these opportunity zones, you have to ensure that the people that live in the zone can be employed in these businesses, that these businesses actually give back to the neighborhood. And more so, instead, the businesses are built, they take money out of the neighborhood because, as they open the Starbucks or whatever, it's going to push the mom and pop shop out of business, because the people that are now working at whatever new hotel has been built, they know Starbucks. They don't know Aunt Bertha's coffee on the side that's in the trailer on the side. And yeah, it looks kind of a hole in the wall, but it has the best coffee in town. They know Starbucks. So the people are going to Starbucks. Aunt Bertha's spot is about to shut down and close permanently, right? And so money is being taken out of the neighborhood and it goes right back into the pockets of the super wealthy and into the corporations. It's all a cycle. And now you're seeing it even with the Fearless Fund. So again, the idea of Black people even doing for themselves is a conversation where people are going to fight you on it. And that's why it's so important not to back out and step out in politics, because understand, these judges that are making these horrible decisions, these judges are appointed by the people that are eventually elected, by whoever puts them into power, right? So all of this is tied together. So when y'all be talking about it don't matter, it's all they all say, there's layers to this. And I get it. Some of these are talking points, and some of us have had some of these talking points for years. But again, in the same way that time evolves, you can't come into 2024 and 2025 with the same talking points of 2016, because we're not in that era anymore. We're not even in the space of 2016, right? It's a new day around here. So people have to evolve in their politics and move with the motion of where things are going. You have to always just be ahead of the game and understand what's happening, because like I've said on these lives, what they're doing now is literally using the language that was used to protect us in regard to civil rights and now weaponizing it. So those words like equality and opportunities and diversity, all that stuff. Now that's being weaponized and flipped on the script where, oh, well, if this scholarship or this program is only for Black business owners that are women, that's discriminatory against other women. What about the other? This is reverse discrimination. This is reverse racism. That's not equality, right? And that's why I was saying, as this new policy comes in, you have to be specific about the language in the laws, right? You have to be specific and say, okay, this is specifically for, descendants of the victims of U.S. chattel slavery or sharecropping or Jim Crow, or specifically Black Americans who were left out of the FHA program. We're gonna start this program that gives all Black Americans $30,000 on a down payment for a house for if they come from a lineage where they were victims of redlining and being left out of the FHA program. Like, if there is not specific language in the policy, they are going to dance around it and use it against us. And that's what they're doing at this point, right? And that's what's also happening with the HBCUs, where they're talking about the conversation of equality and civil rights. And again, Clarence Thomas's work is not done, right? I'm going to get to him a little bit later. But just know, we got a lot of nonsense going here. A whole lot. The point that I would like to make out of all this, understand that oppressed populations are always working harder than groups that normally have nothing to worry about, right? And so when you're looking at the demographics in the US for the last 30 years, personally, I feel like Black people have been putting in the work, doing any and everything in their power to undo the nonsense that we've had to live against. And because white America buys into the idea of American exceptionalism, white America has decided to stop evolving. They already see themselves as the standard. They see themselves as the face of innovation and intellect and technology and everything else. They have no longer decided to invest in themselves. And what I mean by that, when I say invest in themselves, the idea of collective thought is over in that space. They don't care about the well-being of the people. They don't care about infrastructure. They don't care about investment. It's now about me, myself, and I. This is why people like Elon Musk are so celebrated and just paraded around, because they're the face of, again, exceptionalism, right? Now, on the flip side, Black people have been over here busting their behinds, doing it every and anything. And so what ends up happening, as you see Black folks make tiny little strides, right? Little strides, because you're going up against an entire system. A lot of white folks who stop investing in themselves get nervous, and they're like, wait a minute, these people are trying to overtake what we have. We got to do something. And what do? They, like I said earlier, they put in the most draconian politicians. They put in the most extreme politicians. They get behind the most crazy laws. They get behind the most crazy movements, and they do everything that they can do to undo any kind of gains that have been there. And a lot of times, what fools a lot of people is people look at celebrity and think that's progress, right? They look at, our favorite celebrities that are worth however many millions, and they're like, yeah, Black America's fine, it's fine. And so then even people in Black America sometimes get comfortable and like, oh, we ain't got it too bad, we're good, we're fine. I think back to when Revolt TV had the panel on Black America. I was already beefing because I didn't like who was on the panel. It was like Candace Owens, Killer Mike, T.I., a bunch of celebrities. And when they started talking about the state of Black America, what did T.I. say? He brought up all the celebrities, right? Black America's doing great. I mean, look at the rappers. Look at all the millionaires we got. And I'm like, that's not us. That's the anomaly, right? To me, that's saying that in order to somewhat do okay in this country, you have to be one of the best rappers in this country. You have to be one of the best athletes in this country. You have to be one of the best entertainers in this country to do well. For the average everyday person that doesn't want to be an entertainer, that doesn't want to be an athlete, that doesn't want to be a business owner, that is happy going to a 9-to-5 and sitting in their cubicle, and they just want their nice white picket fence. The fact that is not their America, and that's not good enough, because again, people are working for them to not even have that, nonsense. So we're just in this weird cycle of a bunch of nonsense, right? What else did I want to say here? And I think the fear that comes from that is, there's a fear that Black America is going to do to white America what they've done to us, right? When in reality, we just want to be left alone. We just want to live our lives. We just want to start our families, have our yard. Me personally, my dream is to have a lake house. I just want my lake house with my family. I want a big giant willow tree in the backyard, and I want to go fishing in the mornings and be left alone. That's all I want, right? That's it. I don't even want to, that's what I want. A nice lake house. I want a house by the water, but not by the beach, because too many hurricanes, not by the river because they flood, but the lake, I can do the lake. It's nice and quiet. I can hear the birds singing. I can watch the squirrels. I'm all one with nature. That's all I want, right? But even that is a problem for somebody, right? Too much. He ain't supposed to have none of that, right? And so, again, it's just crazy. And this is why I say when it comes to politics, it's also a conversation of getting the money out of politics, which leads me to my next conversation, right? Because we have so many politicians, and I'm glad that the commenter said that earlier about the people in the parties being just bought out by billionaires, because this is where that comes into the conversation. We have so many people who are in positions of power that dictate laws because they're paid off, right? And so even when we're talking Supreme Court, I was baffled as I saw this, right? When they were talking about the gifts that have been given to different Supreme Court justices. And this would explain why some of these people move in the manner that they move. So when we're talking about the value of gifts that are given to our Supreme Court justices, right? So when we're looking here, if we go down, Amy Coney Barrett hasn't really been in long enough, so there's not really anything documented with her. So there's not a record of anything more than $2,000 in gifts. Kagan, same thing. She had about a little under $2,000. Breyer, he's $50,000-$60,000. Roberts, about $100,000. They're pissed at Jackson because Beyonce gave her some tickets to the Renaissance tour. Stevens is sitting at about $200,000. Scalia has about this looks like about maybe $250,000 in gifts. Then we get to Clarence Thomas, $4,042,286 in gifts. Now, just to go a little bit deeper, all right. Now let's just talk about it. You have what you call disclosed gifts, and you have undisclosed. So if we're going in that realm, if we go Kennedy has 18 gifts that are public information where we know what they were, and he has 21 that we don't know about. Stevens has 23 on both, 23 disclosed, 23 undisclosed. Ginsburg, RBG before she died, had 22 disclosed, 61 undisclosed. O'Connor, they don't have the full figure, but they have 73 for undisclosed. Sotomayor, 38 disclosed, 47 undisclosed. Scalia, 23 disclosed, 67 undisclosed. Thomas, 27 disclosed, 319 undisclosed. Tell me these people aren't bought out, right? Tell me these people aren't being paid to implement and influence policy, right? You want to know why we randomly got the anti-masking mandates? Now, this is, I don't feel like revisiting the pandemic because that was a headache, and that was not a fun time to have this channel because I was on here fighting for my life with people in the comments. But when you want to talk about the movement that came out of nowhere where everybody was anti-mask, all of a sudden it would go back to a really big dinner that was a part of an invitation that Clarence Thomas was invited to that also included a lot of people that would influence law and media and push a bunch of different narratives out that would start a national conversation around the idea of getting rid of the mask mandates a little too early in the pandemic and trying to paint the idea that masks didn't work, right? There was money behind that and people bought into it. So understand, mind you, that's just 2004 to 2024. You know, there's a whole bunch of other elements out there. And so this is where I'm saying, like, there's just, there's so much nonsense when I say these people are bought out. Let me take a break, drink some water. I ain't even got to talk about no celebrities yet. We on all the hard stuff tonight. Just know it's a lot of nonsense here. All right. Let me drink my water. I need another sip. I'm thirsty. All right. Where were we? All right. Y'all are hanging with me tonight. Thank you, Tyler Hackner. Again, very specific. Baby Love 14, True Sandra said, let me see. Let's see what Sandra said. I don't know if I can find Sandra's comment on here. I can't see it, but whatever, Sandra, you said, they agree. They said true. Let's see. Noble Valkyrie said, weaponizing that Martin Luther King speech. Of course, yeah, they've used content of the character so much in these arguments, right? And it doesn't even have a correlation with anything. That's the part that cracks me up. Like, they will throw that out there all the time. When in reality, can we be honest? When Martin Luther King died, he had an approval rating of 38%. White people hated him, right? He didn't become this hero until years later. Man. Well, that is why we're delineating as Black Americans, descendants of chattel slavery specifically has to be. That goes back to the conversation of policy, because one of the other things that's happening too is even, and this is a layered conversation because people have their different viewpoints on it, but even the conversation of what you call flat blackness, where as long as you have the skin, you fall under the same umbrella, when in reality, a lot of us have different experiences, right? So people that are from the diaspora, they're going to have a certain experience in the same way that people that are born and raised and have a lineage in the United States are going to have. There's all these different experiences. And what's happening is a lot of times people will weaponize that and utilize it to say everything is all well. So when they say the idea of, well, Black women are the most educated demographic in all of the United States, that conversation is going to include everybody in the diaspora. That also is going to include everybody who's coming over from the continent of Africa into the United States, and they all fall under the Black women conversation. Beautiful, but here's where we run into the issue. When people go into the court systems and say there are systems that are discriminatory, they will use the idea of no, because y'all are the most educated group, when in reality, if you're talking specifically Black American women, that number shifts and that number changes. And so delineation is not always a thing about causing division. It's a thing about putting together the numbers in a more presentable fashion where you can really understand how politics affects everybody in different elements and on a different scale. That's how I've always looked at everything. So yes, delineation, I don't want people to keep looking at it as a weapon to say us versus them, because again, anti-Blackness is global. Everybody's affected by it, but understand certain policy has been written to affect different groups of people specific to the era in which either they came here or whether the lineage is tied. There's all kind of conversations in that realm, right? Let's see. Oh, I love it. That's a great read. Bode Jackson. I suggest that folks read Francis Cresswelling. Yeah, Dr. Francis Cresswelling's the ISIS papers. If you've not read it, it explains a lot of why these folks do what they do. That's a great recommendation. Thank you for sharing that. Serenity Joy said, y'all have been so sweet to Candace Owens sock puppet account this whole chat. I don't know what that's about, but I know in regard to Candace Owens, y'all know where I stand with the lady. And it's interesting. You ain't really seeing her, right? When we talk about the grift, I'll get to her a little bit later, but it's interesting. You see how when the jig is up, folks start to disappear. Last time I checked, she was a part of one of those programs where you pay to talk to somebody on the phone for, I forgot, $15 a minute. That's the last time I've seen her. Jeannie B said, Clarence got all the gifts. Look, Clarence is loaded up, okay? Clarence got everything and did it at the expense of Black people. Every time he's up for something, don't worry, I ain't making sure the Negroes get anything. We're going to handle that. They will get nothing. Nothing, right? And I told y'all, keep an eye. I'm telling you right now, if it's up to Clarence Thomas, when it comes to the Voting Rights Act, he is going after Section 5. In the same way that Section 2A is kind of finding its way through the dockets, Section 5 is the piece that he wants to gut. I'm going to pull up what Section 5 is just for people to know really quick. That is the part that he keeps talking about, and that's making me nervous because he knows that's the part he wants. Really quick, Section 5. Section 5 was designed to ensure that voting changes in covered jurisdictions could not be implemented, used until a favorable determination has been obtained. The requirement was enacted in 1965 as temporary legislation to expire in 5 years and applicable to only certain states. Long story short, when they brought up the Voting Rights Act, they identified the states that had the most out-of-pocket Jim Crow discriminatory voter suppression laws, and they made sure specifically that handful, well, it was like 13 states, those would be the states that would have to really abide by these new federal regulations, and that the federal government was going to oversee and ensure that they were not discriminating against voters, and that there was not going to be any policy implemented that would make it impossible for Black voters to go to the polls. Because this is when people had to count jelly beans to vote, and this is when people were being threatened, and you go to the polling station and people are there armed and telling you to turn around and this polling station is closed, or they wouldn't put legitimate polling hours in the Black districts on purpose so people wouldn't show up, or you had to do the literacy test. Like, this is what Section 5 was all about, identifying the states where those major problems were. So that was going to be Georgia, that was going to be Alabama, that was going to be Mississippi, that was going to be Texas. Like, that was going to be these states where they had these really draconian laws. And so he wants to gut that. And by gutting Section 5, automatically it opens a Pandora's box. So let's just gut everything. Because if you don't need Section 5, then you don't need Section 3. And you don't need Section 1. We just gut it all because everything is equal. And understand that when they made the ruling in 2013 to gut Section 4, or that portion of Section 4, what was it that was said by Roberts? Roberts said, well, at this point, everything is equal. Black people and everybody else no longer need protections for their voting rights because we're past that era. And as soon as the voting rights was gutted in 2013, what's the first thing that happened? Here comes the voter ID laws. Here comes the over-obsessive gerrymandering, right? Here comes all these new crazy laws that can no longer be challenged in court because they're technically legal now, right? And that's why we saw a lot of the nonsense that also happened in 2020. I talked about it on the last live, so I'm not going to revisit it. But please go back and look at what happened in the state of Pennsylvania and what they tried to do to the absentee ballots, right? And that was technically legal based under the fact that, hey, they got rid of all these Voting Rights Acts as far as Section 4. So understand, Section 2A is on the chopping block, and if it's up to Clarence Thomas, he's getting rid of Section 5. Quote me on that. All right. All right, here we go. Somebody said, yeah, but Black Americans who are not immigrants don't have issues with voter ID. Well, understand there's a bigger conversation with this, because think about senior citizens as well. As senior citizens get older, sometimes you have those who turn in their driver's license, right? And a lot of times they don't have an updated ID that is up to date, right? Or if they're in a rural, and it's not even senior citizens, or if somebody's in a rural town, right? When you're talking about the idea of making sure that you stay on top of things. So think about how we also now have the real ID. That's the thing that was put into play during the Bush administration. And, you know, you got to have the real ID with the star on it. Like, understand that this is a way to just slow things down, to make it more difficult for people to go and get certain things and make it more cumbersome. Because again, America doesn't even have a high participation level when it comes to voting anyway. Only 40% of Americans vote. We don't really have massive turnouts. And so they will do anything in their power to continue to, you know, make that chopping block to make less people participate. That's kind of the goal there, right? And so you have that take place. All right, we got to keep going, y'all. Somebody said, respectively, we have provisions for them. That was a red herring for illegals to vote. And the thing is, people, I've said this before, people that are not documented here are not voting anyway. They're not, people that are undocumented are not trying to have their names on any kind of federal documents because they don't want to be found out, right? They're not having a lot of bank accounts. They're getting their money under the table. They're doing a bunch of stuff. So when they keep talking about this idea of like people that were illegally here voting in droves, like Trump said that when Hillary got the popular vote, that extra 3 million votes she had, those were all illegal votes. No, they're not going and voting in these elections, because look at what happens when people get caught voting illegally or whatever. Look at the Black woman who was sentenced to 6 years, right? Over a mishap. There was something undone and she was registered in the wrong district. She went to vote and they tried to sentence her to 6 years. Right? People aren't playing games. And again, I don't think anybody is, well, other than the MAGA cult, most people with any common sense are not married to any politician. No matter how much you may want them to get in office, people are not going to find ways to cheat to get somebody in office, because nobody's going to jail. Like, nobody's going to jail over these 80-year-old politicians, anybody with common sense. Not in a macro scale. Maybe there's a person or two that's a little loony, but when we're talking hundreds of thousands of people going and trying to illegally vote, that's not a thing. Nobody's trying to do that, right? They're not even politically active in that realm. Okay. All right, Byron Donalds. God dang it. Negroes here. Okay. So here's my thing. I understand that there are going to be people who have political views that are different than mine, and that's perfectly fine. This is the United States. You can believe in whatever you want to. You can get behind whatever you want to. You can vote for whatever you want to. But the issue that I have is when people try to push themselves as the face of Black America, but they get behind policy that's detrimental to Black America, and they do it because it is a political come up and they get a paycheck, right? Understand that, you know, they talk about the phrase the grift. I always like watching Tareen reload his channel because he's always talking about this on his as well. But when you talk about the people who are the grifters, there's money to be made in anti-Blackness, believe it or not, right? There's money to be made if you can be the face or a mouthpiece for white supremacy and anti-Blackness and go and do the job for these people, right? They pay you big money. And that's why some of these people that do the tap dancing do some of the hardest tap dancing, because they're getting a great payout with it. So somebody like a Tim Scott, again, he was never elected initially. He was appointed because he played the role. He was able to tap dance. How high do you want me to jump? He gets into his position, and now he knows he's not about to mess up his money. He's going to always go against the grain and say whatever it is that white America wants to hear. That's why he's at the rallies. I just love you so much, Mr. Trump. I just love, you get the, I just love you so much, Mr. Trump. You just do everything so good. He's just so perfect. Right? So he's up there just embarrassing us, right? Now you got Byron Donalds, which was very interesting. So he's at this event and they're talking about just all these different things. And he goes on this argument about how Black Americans tend to, they were a bit more conservative back in the day. And I actually said this on the last live. I said that a lot of times when it comes to politics, Black Americans tend to be conservative on a lot of things, but they don't align with conservative politics or conservative parties. And a lot of times on a macro scale, the GOP, because it's too centered in anti-Blackness and white supremacy. So it's like, yes, people have their viewpoints on certain things, but they're not about to sit here and put a Klan member in office because they feel a certain way about a few things religiously. And so they're going to let the Klan member go in here and do all this other stuff and mess up everything. But those two issues we were conservative about, at least those are protected. Black people don't really move like that collectively. So Byron Donalds is saying this random speech, and then he gets into this part where he's like, and even during Jim Crow, the black family voted more conservative. The black family was together. The black family, and I'm like, and mind he got his big old cigar, big old cigar, because he's just in this cool spot. We're just having cool conversation. And so he finds this way to glamorize life during Jim Crow for Black Americans and tried to paint it as we were better off, right? And I'm sitting here like, well, before I even get into that, it's just interesting that a lot of times when you talk about the people who are going to do the tap dancing, they always find a way to find the lowest of low things in regard to what it is that white America has done and try to desensitize it, to try to wash it up and make it seem like it's not that bad. So you have Tim Scott, who's like, America was never a racist country. There's never been racism here, not in America. Like, so he's going to do that, right? Now you got Byron Donalds talking about Jim Crow wasn't that bad, right? You got all these people who find different things to say and do that somehow take the worst atrocities of white America and paint them to not be that bad. Candace Owens in the conversation around George Floyd. Let me go ahead and paint the narrative of, oh, well, he was on meth, or he was on fentanyl, right? And that's what killed him. As a matter of fact, Candace says, let me make a whole documentary about why George Floyd was not an innocent person and he died because he had fentanyl in his system. And I'm going to go ahead and desensitize the fact that all of America just watched this cop sit on a man's neck for 8 minutes with all his body weight and watch the man continue to say, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. We're watching him foam at the mouth and slowly die. And then you want to sit here and gaslight us and say, oh, well, that was the fentanyl. Right? So these people, you just notice that they always will take the worst atrocities in white America and dumb them down and try to paint them to not be that bad. And that's because a lot of times their leverage and their money, again, comes from white America. So when we're talking about somebody like a Byron Donalds, let's be for real. He is over District 19 in Florida. Let's talk the demographics of District 19 in Florida. 70% white, 19% Hispanic. Again, Hispanic is not a monolith when it comes to voting, right? At least a third of them tend to vote Republican. But then you have to make an exception because the state of Florida has a different kind of population when you're talking about the Latino community and Hispanic community, because you tend to have more people in those communities that tend to vote Republican. And then when you're talking about the black people in the district, it's 5%. So it doesn't really matter what happens with the black demographic. He has to keep the white folks and the Latino community, especially those that identify as white, that just speak Spanish, keep them happy, right? Because his bread and butter is in District 19. He can't come up here doing the super, super black thing. And so he has no problem throwing his integrity out the window if it means that he's going to have a political come up, right? And it's just so funny because, it's interesting because the thing with Byron Donalds that's different than Tim Scott is Byron Donalds can play the role. He has a little bit more swagger than Tim Scott. Tim Scott's just goofy, right? Just goofy. You just like, okay. But Byron can play the role. He can speak the lingo. Byron, he's not even from Florida. He's from New York, right? And so I found it so interesting because what does Byron end up doing? He goes on all of these shows that are hosted by black hosts to try to defend himself, right? He didn't go on the white shows. He wasn't on an Anderson Cooper. He didn't go to Rachel Maddow. He didn't go to the white folks to try to expound on that. He went to the black folks platforms and then tried to talk down to everybody like everybody was stupid. So, he goes to Al Sharpton's show. He goes and talks to Abby on CNN. He goes on the Joy Reid show. He goes on Roland Martin. He goes on all these people's shows. And again, now he's going to start talking the lingo and everything. This is just division. Y'all trying to play me. Oh, that was real cute. He can speak the language, so he can do the whole homeboy thing, but still get behind the nonsense in regard to the policy. And so he's going to continue to gaslight. And the reason that I know he's just full of crap, even going back to the Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, guess who was parading with Marjorie Taylor Greene when all this happened? Who was on the other side of the aisle? Byron was kicking it with Marjorie. Right? Understand Marjorie's on some nonsense. And it was so funny to me because as he kept talking about the black family this, black family that, black family, I'm like, ain't you married to a white woman? Right? And listen, marry who you want to marry. But my question becomes, for me, when it comes to the conversation of blackity, black this, black family, black that, I don't see you. There's no reciprocity in the conversation on your end because, hey, you found the love of your life with this white woman. So be it. Enjoy it. But you don't all of a sudden get to be the dictator on what's good for the black family all of a sudden when on top of that, you're trying to slice up Jim Crow like it was a good thing. Right? Which is really crazy because Joy Reid even brought that up. She's like, you realize under Jim Crow, you couldn't even marry your wife. right? And it was so funny because he kept trying to say, no, my argument was about the fact that under Jim Crow, black people tended to vote more conservative. And I'm like, but in Jim Crow states, black people weren't voting at all. There was no voting. So let's be for real here. Like, get out of here. The handful that were able to get through the cracks and the cranks to vote, that's not a good time for black people. And so you always get these people who pretend to be the gatekeepers of blackness and black intellect. That's my beef. You know, and one of my good friends just said this the other day. You know, there's people who are educated and there's people who have intellect. You can be educated all you want, but when it comes to intellect and intellect in different spaces in regards to things that you actually have expertise on, that's something Byron Donalds has no expertise on in regards to the conversation around blackness, which is why he thinks black people are stupid enough to back his random nonsense where he goes into these white spaces, tries to paint Jim Crow as it wasn't that bad, but then go on the platforms with the black host, and all of a sudden you want to use the homeboy language. Oh yeah, that was real cute. Y'all trying to get over me, but y'all got it all messed up, got the game twisted up. Like, he's sitting here straddling the fence, playing both sides, trying to appease the handful of black people that he may be able to win over and jump into that argument, and also appease white America that stands behind him in District 19 in Florida. Understand, that's kind of what the gift is. The idea is, if they can just get as many black people who are kind of unsure about where they stand on this to come on over to their side, that's brownie points for them, right? Understand that, let's just say in the 2024 election, let's say that Republicans get even more of the black vote. Like, I do feel like some of this is being really sized up because they were saying like, oh, black male vote is 60% Republican right now. No, it's not. It's not. I might put it at 15. I'm not putting it at 60. But let's just say that let's say it goes to 20, right? For them, that's going to be a payout. You did the work. You went out there. You said all the points we needed you to say. You know, you were able to get the black male vote to go from 13% to 20. Oh yeah, we're gonna definitely put some more money into your campaign. We're definitely gonna put some more money into what it is that you want. We're definitely gonna line your pockets a little bit more. Like, understand, all of this is a payout. This is not about community. This is not about collective anything, because Byron Donalds has been on the wrong side of much policy that was implemented to make life better for black Americans, and he's been against almost all of it. So please don't fall for the nonsense. Now, listen, like I said before, I have my smoke for a lot of the nonsense that's happening with the Democrat side, especially in regard to what's happening with Gaza. Like, I got a lot of smoke, but in the same way, I say, look at this. Like I've said before, you have a house, the garage is flooding. That represents Democrats. You have a kitchen that's on fire. That represents the Republicans. Which do you go to first? We're in this space where everybody wants to spend all the time going off about what the Democrats haven't been doing right. And so y'all spending all this time with this flood, and understand, fire is going to move faster than a flood that's filling up a garage. Now, understand, if you don't take care of this flood and you let it continue to fill up, eventually that water is going to mess up the foundation of the house and everything will eventually collapse. But understand that fire moves a lot faster, and fire just spreads and spreads and spreads. And before you know it, while you're pressed about getting this water out the garage, the entire house is engulfed, right? That's kind of where we're at. And so it's just interesting that you have all these people who come to these spaces because they know there is a political come up and a financial come up by jumping into the nonsense. It's one thing to be a Republican. That's people are going to believe in what they believe in. But when you align with white nationalists, when you align with people that are the extremity of white extremism, and you're running behind them and then trying to gaslight black people like, oh, y'all are just tripping. So y'all, and then here comes the, y'all need to get off the Democrat plantation. And they got all the talking points. Again, the talking points from 2016, where I said, we're in 2024 now, y'all got to evolve. You know, they'll do all those different things. So yes, Byron Donalds will sit here and say all this anti-black stuff, then go on the platforms with the black host and try to act like he was at the cookout yesterday and act like we just all stupid, right? Be for real. I can't do it. I cannot do it. So understand, like, there's just the nonsense, right? And so you just continue to just, yeah, a mess, right? And my thing to those people on those platforms, why are you inviting him on the shows? Because when you give them those platforms, it just gives them a bigger opportunity to spread their message. Yes, he was catching backlash, because the question really becomes, if you wanted to paint the conversation of black Americans being more conservative, you can have that conversation. But trying to equate it with the good side of Jim Crow doesn't work, especially when Jim Crow is specifically laws that were aimed against black people. No ifs, ands, or buts. They were specifically for us, to limit what it was we could do and where we could go and what we could be. That was written specifically for us. And here you go with your goofy behind in a cigar trying to paint it like, well, but it did put us together, right? We were hanging together, the black family, as you lay next to Rebecca. Get out of here, right? And so the other piece with that too, and they do this all the time. Like I said, they'll do that and then go into these spaces, because even like Condoleezza way back in 2012, at the GOP convention when she had this, it was a really great speech, but it was just like, but you on the wrong side of the argument. And so when she has this speech where she's like, you know, it's just amazing that a young girl from the Jim Crow South in Alabama could now stand here before you at the GOP convention as the, you know, she's talking about what her positions were. And then all the white people are like doing standing ovations, white women crying. I'm like, but y'all are voting for the, ooh, okay, everybody's stupid. Okay, I can't do it. I cannot do it. Man. And so, and the funny thing is when you're talking about these people that come into these positions and do the grit, eventually they become forgotten when the jig is up, right? So, you know, Diamond and Silk, we brought them up many times. With Diamond and Silk, what was interesting is Diamond did all the talking. Silk didn't really do too much talking. She would just echo whatever Diamond said, right? And so Diamond would go to the rallies and be all loud and y'all need to understand and say whatever she said. And then Silk would be right behind her. Exactly. That's right. Yep. And they would be doing all that. And the people are just laughing. And what happens? Diamond dies, unfortunately. So Diamond goes on to glory. And because Silk never had a voice, where is Silk now? You ain't seen her. The last time we saw Silk was at some random rally where Trump was giving his acknowledgments to Diamond, but he didn't even know who they were. And I'm like, mind you, he was paying them to go and stump for Trump. And then when you find out they were only getting $1,200 for the events, I was like, wait, that's all y'all are getting to sell out your community is $1,200? Sounds like the stimmies that y'all are gassing up. Okay, interesting. Like, man. But it's interesting because, like I said, eventually the grift moves on. Like, at some point, the whole Trump MAGA cult will go into whatever next form it will be in. And all the people who are the faces of getting behind the nonsense will go down with the nonsense as well. And there will be a new wave that comes up, right? So it's just interesting to see how, like, folks move with all that. Like, get out of here. And as far as the people who keep trying to act like, well, during Jim Crow, I mean, we were together. Those are black businesses. I 100% hear the aspect of during the times where we were forced to be together, black businesses were able to thrive. That part is technically true. But understand, people trying to paint this like integration or the fight for integration was because we wanted to be in the same spaces as white people. That wasn't the conversation. The conversation was we're paying the same tax dollars, sometimes more, because we talked about that on the other live where black people were paying a higher property tax rate than white Americans. And that goes back to the conversation of blockbusting and everything that we talked about in the book, The Color of Law. But again, if we're paying the same amount of taxes, if not more, than our white neighbors, then we should be privy to exactly the same services that exist. Understand that there would be instances where a black person's house would be on fire. And depending on the neighborhood, fire department's like, well, we ain't going over there. That's y'all, figure it out. That was the issue that was happening under the conversation of segregation, right? Those are the things that we're talking about, right? And so that's why people were fighting like, no, you have got to integrate these policies because we deserve to be able to use the same gas stations, go to the same beaches, be able to get houses in the same neighborhoods, be able to go to any school we want to. Whether it's an HBCU or whether we choose to go to a majority institution, our tax dollars are paying for all of this. We should have privy into all of it. That's the conversation. But they've somehow tried to romanticize the idea of black people being stuck together under a system of oppression and trying to paint it like it was a good time and everybody was just happy, as if black folks weren't being lynched, as if black folks weren't being chased across the other side of town, as if sundown towns weren't a freaking thing. Be for real. As if all our leaders weren't taken out, as if COINTELPRO wasn't a thing. Later going in like, kids, out of here. I cannot do it with these people. It's just the stupidity of it all. So yeah, Byron Donalds, he's playing his role because again, he's in a district that's 70% white. He can't bring that black stuff to them, right? And again, 19% Latino Hispanic. And when you're talking about the voting patterns of a lot of those in the Latino Hispanic community in the state of Florida, they tend to vote Republican. Only a 5% black vote in his district. He has to play the role. He has to be friends with the Marjorie Taylor Greens. He has to act like Marco Rubio's not an idiot. He has to act like Ted Cruz is super smart. Like he has to get behind that. He has to stand behind Mitch McConnell. That has to be his buddy. You know what I mean? He has to get behind all these people. He has to rally behind Trump. He has to go to New York to the courthouse and say that this is a sham and this is the system working against the people because it's going to mess up his money if he doesn't. He will lose his constituents because understand, 70% of white Florida voters in District 19 have no problem getting rid of him and putting somebody white into that role. And that's why white folks that tend to, or black folks that tend to jump into those grifting roles where not only are they endorsing policy that tends to saturate an anti-blackness, but they have to really tap dance and go above and beyond. They have to do that because they recognize it's easy for them to be replaced. Look at Herman Cain. Died and nobody cared. He was one of the main ones rallying behind Orange Man. Went to the rally right in Tulsa. You know, and Terrence K. Williams was there too. I remember Terrence K. Williams had a little video. They played a little R&B. He's trying to party and make it seem like there's this huge collective of black people at the Trump rally, and it's about 10 of them together sitting there looking miserable. Herman Cain sitting there. This is the peak of the pandemic when stuff was still bad, right? Herman Cain dies 2 weeks later. Not even a mention by Orange Man or any of the people who rallied behind him. I'm like, see, this is how quickly you're forgotten, because when you are a mouthpiece for anti-blackness and white supremacy, you're just continuing to serve the role, but you're not important. You don't get a seat at the table. They'll let you in the room, but you won't be talking at the table. You're just happy to be in the room. And at some point, somebody's going to ask you to get them a glass of water. Anyway, there's that. Thank you, T. Brown. Why invite Byron in the first place? He had no business being there. Like, you already know what your intent was. And then he really tried to gaslight and role play and shift it around. Now, I will say to Joy Reid, the critique that I have on Joy Reid's show is Joy Reid cuts everybody off and doesn't let them answer the question. And then it does make it look like she's trying to shut their answer down. And then people who are on the other side of the argument are like, see, she's not even letting them speak. Joy, you don't have to let them speak. You brought them on the show to say their nonsense. Let them say their nonsense, and then you address it. If you keep cutting them off while they're mid-sentence, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? But y'all stop inviting these people on the platform. You keep giving them a stage, right? There's certain folks I just don't give the energy to. Do you know how many random crazy white folks will send me a message and they're like, I want to debate you on my channel. Can you come to my channel? No, because this ain't a game for me. Like, get out of here. This is not about your ego. You can go straight to you know where. Anyway, y'all better be happy I have no interest in running for politics. I'll tell you that. Oh, Byron's goofy behind big, just big and goofy, just goofy. Miss Nocturnal 9 said Al Sharpton is a drifter. He's not my type. I don't deal with Al. Al, I got a whole bunch of smoke for with a lot of different things. I mean, he can talk the talk, but I have no expectations of Al Sharpton at this point, right? I knew the time when he had the people walking around the building 13 times like the Battle of Jericho that he was done. He wasn't serious no more. He can talk a good game, but it's past the baton. You did what you could do in your era. Next in line, please. Right? Now, I'll say on his show, I think he does a decent job of bringing awareness to certain, conversations and all, but he's not my, you know what I mean? Okay. Exactly, Zebralins. They invite these people on their TV shows for views. They don't care how extreme their views are. Those media companies want the clicks for ad revenue. And honestly, and we've talked about this too, this is one of the reasons why I really think the media specifically would love for Orange Man to get back in office, because just think of how, and I hate to say this, but think of how exciting the news cycle is when Orange Man is in there, because it's something crazy every day. And even with him not in office, because the seeds have been planted and everything has sprouted and grown, you still have all the craziness. So news outlets have been getting their highest rate, like since 2016 onwards. All the news networks, well, CNN's kind of struggling now, and Fox News is struggling because all the people then jumped ship and went to Newsmax and OAN or whatever else. But understand that because Trump was so unorthodox, the news cycles had so much to talk about. Understand, American politics was boring before Orange Man got in there, right? It was respectable. It was dignified. It was controversial for Barack to wear a tan suit. It was controversial for Michelle Obama to show her arms. You know what I mean? It was controversial for Hillary Clinton to have an opinion. You're supposed to be first lady. Your job is to shut up and stand behind your man, right? That was kind of American politics. You know what I mean? George Bush and all of them. It was a whole lot going on. You get Cuckoo Man in there and the nonsense, and you got Charlottesville. You got people being run over by cars. You got all kind of crazy things happening. You got these Nazi rallies and Jews will not replace us in blood and soil. And the news is like, what the hell? Yeah, get on that. Let's get a camera crew down there. And before you know it, they're stirring the pot, right? So they play a role in a lot of this. They play a role in stirring this. The fact that they, especially in 2016 and going into 2020, they showed probably every Trump rally on TV, every last one. And mind you, Trump is never really talking policy. This is his ego comedy show. He's up there just talking about everything. The toilets, it didn't flush. The water didn't flush. The toilets didn't flush. And when I got in there, I said, put more pressure on the toilets. Now the toilets flush. I'm like, I know these people are still going to rally behind him. Okay. Okay. All right. That's all we got. This is all we got. All right. Let's see. Where are we here? Yes, Shay Smith, $1,200 to sell your folks out, Diamond, and so $1,200, and they shared an apartment. I was like, wait. Now listen, y'all don't ever have to worry about me doing the nonsense, but understand if there was ever a situation where somehow I ended up on the wrong side of history for a paycheck, know that it would be such an amount of money that it would be so unfathomable that anybody would be like, well, I had to take it. But see, I don't have a price. So I was like, the fact that y'all are doing all this and y'all are sharing an apartment, like y'all don't even have enough to have your own places. Ooh. Sitting together sharing that webcam. Make it make sense. $1,200. Thank you, Jules. Yeah, but the slaves were happy. Same thing. That goes back to the PragerU nonsense. Or even when we talk about the initial history of Georgia textbook, where they talked about slavery wasn't that bad, and the people had a frolic. They sang, and after the work was done, they would dance in circles and just have a good time. And again, they had homes. They were fed. There was security. They try to paint it like, if they would have stayed across the water, they would have still been in these very feral environments. Where they're getting hit by rods, like crazy. And the fact that, thank you, somebody just said it, J Cash, the money man, and the fact that sundown towns still exist, right? I don't know too many black folks really still going to Forsyth County, Georgia. I know it's finally started to shift a bit, but they still got a history over there, right? Man. Okay. Let's see. Exactly, sick of it. Said white Christian nationalism is real scary because it has nothing to do with values. It's all about maintaining a status quo, maintaining exactly what's there. All right, I'm going to pause on that and move right along. This is going to be quick. Okay, so people kept asking me about Amber Rose and Sexy Red and a lot of these celebrities that all of a sudden are these big Trump supporters and whatever. Again, the thing I'll say is this. It's interesting because, one, I do feel a lot of these people are probably paid off anyway. They've been paid. In the same way Orange Man pays people to go to his rallies, I'm sure some of these folks are paid to say some of the nonsense that they say. But what's more interesting is that people think that the intellect of Black America is on the Shade Room and that the intellect of Black America is at the Breakfast Club. That's not the majority of Black America. And so I'm not really worried about these celebrities that are out here saying the nonsense, because who's honestly listening to Amber Rose for political advice? Please raise your hand if you, when you go to the polls, and you go and check the boxes for who's going to be your governor or representatives in your House and Senate, that Amber Rose is the first person you think of. What would Amber Rose do here? Geez, now she has a whole tattoo on her forehead, but I know that she knows what's best for me. And this is nothing against the people with tattoos on their forehead. Do you? What would Sexy Red say? What would the girl who came up with a chapstick that is flavored like chlamydia and gonorrhea? What would she say? What would she think when it comes to voting? Like, please understand, people are not foolish enough to put their livelihood in the hands of celebrities. But people think that Black America is so stupid that they will sit here and parade these Black celebrities around, or I don't think Amber Rose technically counts as Black, but all these different celebrities around, or people that are marketed to celebrity or into Black spaces, and paint them to be the face of Black America and paint them to be the voice of reason for Black America, and think that Black Americans are too stupid and will align with what celebrities say, because yes, so many of us are really looking up to Amber Rose to make our political decisions. Yeah, I'm really going to her. So I don't even have the time. And it's funny because she was like, well, she was saying Orange Man is for women's rights. And I'm like, just by her saying that, I can tell she's not paying attention to anything. So there's the end of that. Amber Rose, have a seat. But clearly her money's funny. You need to check. Same thing, Stacey Dash, all of them being the same nonsense. You see Stacey Dash been quiet too, right? You ain't seen her in a while. She was more so, running behind Romney and all of them. And then her time was up. She got fired from Fox News, right? We haven't really seen her in a while. The last time we saw her, she was crying because she found out DMX died 2 years earlier. So I don't have the energy for these goofy celebrities that all of a sudden think that they're swaying the political votes. A lot of the people who run behind, the celebrities that want to get behind crazy policy and act like this stuff isn't too bad, or y'all tripping it. Yeah, get behind this person. It's structured. And at the end of the day, they do this every political season, and every side does it. And the Democrats do it with their thing, and they'll go and get all the big celebrities and have these big concerts. Republicans do it. But at the end of the day, people are going to vote for who they feel has their best interest, not what celebrity told them to go and vote for, right? If you think I'm basing my votes on what celebrities want when I'm not in the same tax bracket as them, right? Absolutely not. They're in a different space. They're protecting their money. They're protecting their livelihood. They're protecting, again, that conversation of deregulation, being able to jump into different spaces where they can get the 7 and 8 and 9 figure deals. They're not in the same conversation as us. So please stop falling for it. All right. There's that. All right, where are we here? Piscean Beauty said, yes, but Americans are also stupid, which I totally agree. But, and I said this before, but I really think when it comes to the stupidity, sorry, white America, y'all take the cake. Like, and the luxury is for a lot of people in white America, they get the luxury to be collectively stupid because there's so many of them. And because they have so many that back their same political views, they're always going to be okay because at the end of the day, anti-blackness is still locked in and everything is still going to uphold the status quo of whiteness. So it doesn't matter who's in charge on that side. White people never have anything to lose in any election. They'll be okay no matter who's in office. It's everybody else that has things to think about, right? They'll be okay. They'll figure it out, right? There's that. Somebody said, what about when Trump tried to tell us to inject bleach to kill COVID? Between that and remember T.I. was on the radio. T.I. was like, yeah, you just drink a hot liquid. It's the hot liquid that kills all the chemicals. I'm like, so you know, now T.I., you're smarter than all these scientists and people that are doing the research, because at this point, there wasn't even a vaccine yet. Nobody knew how to address this yet. People weren't even sure if this was respiratory or if this was bacterial as far as being on surface levels. Like, there was so much that was unknown. He's talking about you just drink some hot tea. So everybody drink some hot tea and lemon, and you still choking out your lung, like coughing up a lung. Drink some hot tea and lemon. Get some Lipton. That'll take care of a whole. Who knew that all you needed to end a global pandemic was just some Lipton? Go on and put some agave in there if you don't want to use regular sugar. Somebody said now Silk's out here struggling. I ain't seen her in a while. I haven't seen her since that event that Orange Man was at where he didn't know who she was, right? And, you know, she probably do exactly what Candace did, where Candace all of a sudden tried to come on back to the black side and, hey, y'all, you know what, black people, I love us, Wakanda forever. Same thing. Like they do that after the gig is up, or the jig is up, then they come back and they all of a sudden try to act like they're down. And it's like, we didn't forget. We ain't forgot. Like, man. Somebody saying, I'm not sure if you saw how Palestinians treat black African American or black African Palestinians like ish. I'm sure you'll say it's not your problem to discuss business. I'll say for with Palestine, here's my concern. I don't want my tax dollars blowing up people. That's just where I'm at, right? I don't want my tax dollars blowing up anybody, period. That's just where I stand. It doesn't sit right with me, especially when we have so many things here that we need to manage. The idea of spending money, because Netanyahu and them, they got enough over there. They don't even need our help. They got enough weapons and money to do whatever atrocities they want to do over there amongst themselves. So I don't like the idea of us using our weapons and the resources that we have to go and kill people across the water, and not even just to Palestine, in any place where there is an atrocity. Y'all know I am anti-war in all of this. I don't believe in the idea of people going and killing each other all in the name of a handful of government leaders that have beef with each other. If they got beef with each other, they can lock themselves in a room with a blade and go at it. Y'all get some switchblades and box cutters and knock yourselves out. You know, we put it in the boxing ring and you can put it on Zeus Network. We'll all watch. Y'all go for it, right? But the idea of bringing in the people and going and bombing civilian locations and bombing churches and bombing mosques and bombing synagogues and bombing schools and all these different places, and people that are minding their business, and they're being bombed by somebody who doesn't even know who they are, being bombed by somebody who doesn't even know they exist. That doesn't sit right with me. So for that, I can't just sit silent and act like, well, it ain't got nothing to do with me and my folks. And even if whatever happens with the Palestinians and how they see black folks, to me, it's still not right for my tax dollars to go and kill them. In the same way with the conversation with Ukraine, because yes, even with Ukraine, we know a lot of them do not deal with black folks. A lot of them are racist as hell. We saw how a lot of the people that were like African nationalists that were over there were trying to help, and they were told, well, just so you know, they might call you the N-word. What? No, the way I would have been packing my suitcase, well, good luck to y'all. I ain't about to stand here with y'all with this nonsense. But even in that, I don't like the idea of our tax dollars blowing up and killing people. Nobody should be dying at the hands of world leaders, period. Whether that's through war, whether that's through industrialized famine that is pretty much institutionalized through the powers that be, I'm not down with any of that. That's some effed up stuff. Leave people alone. That's where I'm at on that. All right. Oh, y'all are cooking Amber Rose. I just never took her seriously. Like, first of all, when you were with Kanye, you weren't even allowed to talk. Okay, your job was to be quiet and just walk. So don't all of a sudden act like you were all about the people and you have a voice now. You get out of here. Bye. All right. Y'all have been really dope in this chat today. I just want y'all to know that. Come on, somebody gets it. For you to create, I appreciate that. The GOP doesn't need all of us to fall for their nonsense. They only need to pick off an ignorant few for them to win. Like, again, so going back to like Michigan in 2016, it was just 11,000 votes that gave Orange Man the state of Michigan. That's not calling anybody ignorant or anything, but just understand how close the margins are in a lot of these places. I think this will be a very close election, possibly in some states, right? And that's why they're doing everything in their power to start shaking things up and putting in all this new regulation and trying to make it harder for votes to be counted and getting rid of election boards and getting rid of election officials, doing all these different crazy things to try to make sure that 2020 doesn't happen again. Like, just understand, there's a lot going on here. Okay, I want to shift gears here. Let me go to Jay-Z. Now, I told you I don't like celebrities in a lot of certain things sometimes. And I think some of these celebrities need to be careful with what it is that they get behind, because sometimes it is not always good. And I've been seeing this article floating around where they're like, Jay-Z and Rock Nation investing $300 million in the school so that Black kids have a better chance for education. And I was like, something don't sound right with this. I don't know. This kind of goes back to the Inspire Change thing that he had with the NFL. We did a video on that as well, where it was painted that they had locked into this thing and there was going to be all this money going into Inspire Change, but Inspire Change, the money that would be generated from that would be generated by the t-shirts sold through Inspire Change. And the money generated from the t-shirts would go to ensuring equity and education and everything else like that. But you, the people, had to pay for it. And the one benefit that we get is that he gets to pick the people who do the halftime show at the Super Bowl. I was like, okay, this isn't really revolutionary, but okay, I guess. So here we are. So this article is coming from commondreams.org. This ain't it. Pennsylvania slammed Jay-Z's Rock Nation for school voucher push. An out-of-state billionaire is pairing with suburban Philadelphia. One tried to destroy public education, said one critic. As pro-public education groups plan a rally at the Pennsylvania state capitol, educators and advocates on Friday criticized hip-hop icon Jay-Z's company, Rock Nation, over a campaign backing a proposed school voucher program in the Commonwealth. The campaign's Dine and Learn events in Philadelphia this month are intended to share information about the Pennsylvania Award for Student Success, or PASS, Lifetime Scholarships as supporters also call them. If approved by the state legislators in the next budget, the program will put tax dollars toward education opportunity accounts for certain families to send to their K-12 private schools rather than low-performing public ones. We have enjoyed such a special connection with Philadelphia, and so we've made it our mission to invest in long-term success of the city's change makers. Rock Nation Managing Director of Philanthropy, Diana Diaz, said in a statement, "Impact starts with the students and with awareness. We want to empower youth and families with the knowledge to pursue their scholastic dreams, make their voices heard, and become the leaders of tomorrow." While the campaign led to multiple headlines about how Rock Nation is helping underprivileged students in Philadelphia get into private schools, some critics of putting tax money, in this case, potentially tens or hundreds of millions of dollars toward private school tuition, expressed disappointment and frustration on Friday, just weeks away from Pennsylvania's June 30th budget deadline. "This ain't it," said the American Federation of Teachers of Pennsylvania on social media, posting a photo of Jay-Z, who's given his name, Sean Carter, with suburban Philadelphia multi-billionaire Jeffrey Yes. Now understand, Jeffrey Yes is one of these crazy Trump folks. I just want y'all to know that. A Republican mega donor with a history of using his money to push for school vouchers and defeat the progressive political candidates, right? And this person that posted, Jay-Z and Yes, toxic pairing. This ain't it. And for good measure, here's a still of Sean Carter and Jeffrey Yes, Pennsylvania's richest man, potential Trump Treasury Secretary, and the force behind the voucher push in Pennsylvania. Don't get it twisted. PASS is a yassified school choice voucher bill, one social media user wrote. Other critics also mentioned Yes, Phil Gentry, an organizer with West Philly Coalition for Neighborhood Schools, referenced reporting that the billionaire is being considered as a potential Treasury Secretary if former Republican President Donald Trump beats Democratic President nominee Joe Biden. Just to be clear for those not in Pennsylvania, Gentry noted, the legislation Jay-Z is supporting here is a Republican-led effort to gut public education, spearheaded by future Trump cabinet member Jeffrey Yes. Challenging the framing of some of the news coverage about Rock Nation campaign, Philadelphia public interest lawyer Dan Ervik Asselberg said, as Pennsylvania is on the verge of transforming the most inequitable school funding system in the nation, an out-of-state billionaire is pairing with a suburban Philadelphia one to try to destroy public education instead. The attorney highlighted that the hip-hop billionaire's company is pushing for vouchers as Democrats in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives are working to pass a $5.1 billion transformation to help the Commonwealth's poorest districts, sharing a report from the Pennsylvania Capital Star. He is pushing vouchers in the same week that the PA House is working to pass a $5.1 billion transformation bill. Ervik also circulated criticism from the New York Times Magazine journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones, who said that voucher programs have not been shown to improve results for poor Black children because most cannot get into high-quality private schools. Read the fine print. All of the money is coming from taxpayers, she continued. Roc Nation's involvement is to convince poor Black parents to leave public schools, while past advocates argues that the program will not take money from public schools because it will be fulfilled by government funds from a separate line item that will not reduce the overall budget for public education. Hannah-Jones pushed back. It is a lie that these programs do not take from public school funding. Fewer kids in the classroom means fewer dollars to the school, the journalist stressed. This is a windfall to the city's private schools at the expense of the public ones most kids attend. Citing research by Michigan State University professor Josh Cohen, the author of The Privateers, a forthcoming book on school vouchers, Hannah-Jones added, "Stop playing with us. Not only do students who go to private school on vouchers not perform better, 1 out of 5 leave the private school and actually see an improved academic result by returning to public schools." All right, Josh Cohen also pointed, terrible vouchers are education's predatory lending, setting aside that 3/4 of voucher users were already in private school, and those schools reject anyone they want. Vouchers devastate learning for kids who do switch, worse than what COVID-19 and Katrina did to academics. All right. I'm going to stop there. And the point that I want to make, because again, and we've talked about this so many freaking times. That's why I was so annoyed when I saw this article. Understand, when people try to tell you that like these vouchers do not take from the public schools, how do we fund our public schools, right? Your public schools are funded by the property taxes in the area. The line item within property taxes goes to the schools. Anytime you pull a student out of a public school system, the tax dollars for that student leaves that school system as well, and it goes to wherever that student is now going. Now, this is what's happening in places like Philadelphia, and this is kind of what had been happening in DC for years and years. And this is why today in DC, most kids don't go to their neighborhood school. So you can have a city block with 20 kids and they go to 12 different schools, right? And there's a conversation about wealth and money, because what's so funny with this, as DC has been gentrified and the white population has grown, when you're talking about the public high schools in DC, only 11% of white high school students go to school in DC. The rest are all in private schools in Maryland and in Virginia. Right. And so understand that as people pull out of the public school system, it takes money out of the public school system. And what ends up happening is that the people who have the least, the people who don't have the luxury to go to a private school, the people who get arrested when they try to put their parents in a school district that doesn't match their zip code, those are the people that are left out. And the people who do have money get the benefit of having the luxury of whatever they want. And that's why when people were talking about the conversation of school choice, this is all some nonsense. Here's where the issue is. What ends up happening is the people in power always gut the school systems. The school systems get punished. So when we go back to No Child Left Behind, which again, this was Bush doctrine, right? The main premise of No Child Left Behind was they were going to set these new standards for every public school in America. And if the schools did not meet these standards, they would lose funding in the next academic year. And then they would somehow be in a space where they still had to meet the threshold of what was required beforehand, that, you know, when they didn't meet the standard, but now they have less money to do it. They have less resources to do it. The teachers are overworked, burned out. And then, of course, what happens? They go and they do it. The school still underperforms. And then year after year after year, the schools underperform. What ends up happening? Here come the super wealthy people. They show up and say, hey, you know, this district's not doing well. This one's not doing well. And they privatize everything and they start shutting down the public schools. And that's exactly what happens. So if you talk about DC, that was my beef with Fenty. One of the things Fenty did back in 2007, closed down 21 middle schools. What do you think those schools are now? Real estate, right? Helping to make sure that as all these wealthy white people come into the city, they got a place to live. And so Fenty pretty much sold out DC's children because he got in the pockets with all these people who were advocating for the idea of private vouchers and money this and money that. And mind you, that was just middle schools. I didn't get to the elementary and to the high schools. And so understand, public education is a very layered conversation. And it depends on where you live, because there are some places where public education works. I came out of public education. Where I was at, Bethel Public Schools, you know, we weren't in a rich town, but we weren't in a poor town. What worked in our favor was that we were by a military base. So you had a lot of military families that had a little piece of change. And so we went to somewhat okay schools. If you look at the national ratings for like my high school, I think it's rated like a C-, which is not great, but it's not terrible. Now, in some of these areas where you have a lot of wealth inequality, yes, More needs to go into the public schools. And so the fact that there is a $5.1 billion bill that was being put out there to ensure that let's fix the problems that are existing in Philadelphia public schools. And then here comes Jay-Z, who doesn't even live in Philly. You don't even live there. Why don't you go take care of Brooklyn, right? Well, that's being gentrified too. But no, you go all the way in Pennsylvania, worried about what they have, and now you're interrupting what they have, and y'all try to pass it off as revolutionary policy that's going to help Black kids. It's trying to keep it together here. Here's the thing. Yes, there are going to be kids who benefit from this, but there are going to be more kids who are left out. And understand, when it comes to these private schools, there is no regulation. They don't have to take the kids if they don't want to. This is why we have the lottery systems. This is why, like in places like DC, places like New York, and a lot of these major cities, there's lottery systems to get into some of these schools. And a lot of times, the kids that don't have the money, the kids that come from certain backgrounds are never selected, right? And so they're not left with a lot of options. And then what's left? Well, I guess you can still try the public school system that's been gutted so many times, where they have a fraction of the budget they had 20 and 30 years ago. But again, they're still expected to perform at exactly the same rate that they were 30 years ago, or whatever the new standard is. And in addition to the fact, when you bring in the Project 2025 nonsense, and you bring in the nonsense that happened under Betsy DeVos, just understand that public education in America, like I have been saying, is under attack, because the idea is to privatize it, because there is money to be made in privatizing education, because you have tens of millions of children who need a public education. And so if you can privatize it and get money from that, because the vouchers are going into the pockets of the people who are running these programs, there is money to be made. And that's really the issue right there. And that's why I'm looking at Jay-Z so sideways. And again, the taxpayers are paying for this. It's still money coming from the tax dollar. It's just meaning that the kids that are leaving the public school system, that money goes into the voucher program, which now goes to the private school. Here's the issue. If you're paying tax dollars or something, your tax dollars pay for public services, not private, right? Imagine if your tax dollars were paying for the private jet of Jay-Z. You'd be pissed off, right? Imagine if your tax dollars, and this is not to just go after the two of them, but imagine if your tax dollars was paying for all of the costumes that Beyonce's gonna have on her next tour, or all of the costumes that Janet, well, she don't be really wearing no costumes. Janet be touring in sweatpants, but like, if your tax dollars were going into the pockets of wealthy private citizens that already have money, that don't need our money. That's what's happening all across the nation with public education, and this idea of school choice and the vouchers, and putting all this money into the hands of private wealthy folks. And again, it goes back to the conversation of private equity firms. Money talks around here. And you have a lot of people who will sit here and pretend to be the face of revolution, who will sit here and pretend to be the face of the people, but they're behind some nonsense, right? And so that's why one of the biggest critiques I've always had of Jay-Z is I don't see him as anybody that's revolutionary. I see him as a celebrity that knows how to line his pocket. That's what celebrities do. They're rich, they're wealthy, they go and they do that. That's what they want to get behind, right? And so, hey, I guess we can celebrate that, yeah, you get a cool halftime show here and there, but that's symbolism. That's not anything tangible. That's 13 minutes. 13 minutes out of a 365-day-a-year experience. And we're over here slicing it up because we got to see Usher, Dr. Dre, and Jennifer Lopez, and Shakira, and The Weeknd, and Rihanna do a halftime show. And then everybody paints that to be like, yeah, Jay-Z's doing so much for us. He's not. That's not how this stuff works. Anyway, I'm really saying that because as somebody who worked with kids and has seen what happens in public schooling, and what happens when the funding is yanked, and what happens when kids get left out. That is one of my biggest triggers. Nothing triggers me more, because kids, my thing is, kids should not have to pay for the faults of the adults, right? Now, somebody was smart with me one time because I said, children don't ask to be here. And they're like, well, none of us have to be here. True. But once we're here as the adults, it's our job to make sure that the kids are okay, especially if they're our kids. So when you're kind of selling the kids down the river and trying to say, well, it's giving an opportunity to make sure that poor Black kids have an opportunity. No, if you want to make that opportunity take place, you make sure that the state government ensures that there's equity within the funding, and that the funding is not only going to the wealthiest districts. Maybe when we're having a conversation of property taxes, maybe it has to be something where the wealth is more so put in one giant pool that goes to the states, and then it's spread out evenly amongst all the districts so that everybody has a fair shot. Wouldn't that make more sense? But, and it even goes back to what you're seeing where in the cities, what do you have? You have Buckhead that's trying to break off from Atlanta. You have portions that are trying to break off from Baton Rouge, where the people that have the money are trying to break off from everybody else and hoard the resources, and to hell with everybody else. Good luck. this is so much bigger than just Jay-Z. This is so much bigger than just what's happening in some of these stories. This is some nationwide stuff. So this is why I'm like, people, y'all have got to pay attention. I get it. I'm tired of these politicians. I want to fight all of them. Sometimes I ask myself, like, there just aren't enough grassy knolls anymore. Like, what? I shouldn't say that on here, but Lord, I'm over a lot of these people. But the idea of checking out and just moving as if everything is going to be all right and we'll get them next time, there's not about to be a next time with a lot of this stuff. And it's going to affect your kids. It's going to affect so many people because everybody's decided to be nonchalant because a lot of folks like to let their ego lead the way. There's a lot of folks who are not even really in tune with politics. They just want to be the person that has the opposing viewpoint because, one, they think black people are collectively stupid, so they make it their brand to go against black people and paint us to be stupid, and they try to paint themselves to be the smartest one in the room. Well, y'all are just dumb. Y'all still, that's what y'all got behind. That's what y'all voted for. I'll never forget the person on here where I was talking about something, and she's like, well, that's what you voted for. And I was like, okay, well, listen. Let me know what you would have done there. And she gave me this long dissertation about nothing. She started talking it's the construct of voting, which is not a real thing because it's a construct of the people. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then at the end, they said they wrote Jesus in the ballot. Be for real. I love y'all, but be for real at the same time. Like, man, I think I covered all my main topics. Let's double check my video title here and just make sure I'm not lying to y'all. Really quick. I just want to make sure. Let's type in Calvin Michaels. Let's see if I covered everything. And then we can just chop it up in here for a minute. Okay, we talked about Louisiana. We talked about Amber Rose. We talked about Jay-Z. We talked about Project 2025. We talked about Byron Donalds. Oh, Caitlin Clark. Okay, let's make this quick. I'm about sick of her too. Okay. It's so interesting. So Caitlin Clark did not make the Olympic team, and they're trying to sit here and act like, you know, it's the end of the world. And they're trying to say, like, I saw a bunch of articles that were saying this was because of racial discrimination. Mind you, there are other white women who have made the Olympic basketball team for the women. Maybe it's because Caitlin Clark just got out of college a few months ago and she just joined the WNBA. And she's also not the best player in the WNBA. And understand that, listen, Caitlin Clark will come into her own when it is due time. But the coddling that they are giving this woman is killing me softly. The way they have made her the Taylor Swift of the WNBA, like, they act like this one. Like, listen, it's basketball. Every time she gets fouled, they want to make an article. And you get even a lot of, I was looking at LeBron James sideways. I was looking at Charles Barkley sideways. I was looking at Shannon Sharp sideways. Stephen A. Smith, all these folks who are sitting here acting like Caitlin Clark doesn't know how to take a hit. It's basketball. That's all they do is elbow each other and trip each other and fall. It's a tough sport. If you think Caitlin Clark is a punk, be for real, right? We just watched Angela Reese like get a whole clothesline and slam to the ground and get back up and keep playing. But the idea of somehow painting it to be that there is this vendetta against Caitlin Clark and all the black WNBA players are trying to hurt her because they're jealous of what it is that she brings to the table. Can y'all be for real? Like, Caitlin Clark will be able to shine in her own if you let her shine in the same way that everybody else can. But y'all sit here, and every time a white person comes into a space that is traditionally dominated by black folks, they size that person up and paint them to be the next coming of Jesus. And then everybody's supposed to protect them. And then when that person gets critiqued or things don't go their way, all of a sudden it's because black folks are being too aggressive. So you got all these people telling these black WNBA players that have been playing and getting underpaid, making, you know, bare minimum dollars to the point where they got to play overseas and play in Russia, and now they get detained and got to be in prisons and all, and you're telling them take it easy on Caitlin, who have different options. Like Ice Cube, remember, he offered her to come to his league, like what, $3 or $5 million, and so she didn't even have to do the WNBA if she didn't want to. Caitlin is gonna be okay. I'm sure that if she is still in the WNBA, they will definitely invite her to the 2028 Olympics. But the idea of thinking that somebody just got into the WNBA and automatically she's supposed to be invited to the Olympics when her team didn't even win the championship this year or last year. Can y'all be for real? The way y'all will move the goalposts when it comes to white folks, it's driving us crazy. We're tired, right? And I have nothing against the girl. I don't know her like that. I don't follow her like that. I've seen her play. She does a great job when she does. But at the end of the day, she is not the WNBA. She is one player in a system that has been fighting to be seen for years. And really, when you want to talk about it, the work of people like Angela Reese and all of the other people who have been doing the work for years and years, in addition to Caitlin Clark, that's what's bringing up the conversation that's making people all of a sudden go to these games. The only reason Caitlin Clark is even a part of this conversation is because of the smoke between her and Angela Reese, or Angel Reese. I've been saying Angela. I'm thinking Angela Rye. Sorry, Angel Reese, right? It's because of the smoke that existed between the two of them. And they wanted to paint Angel to be the villain and the big bad guy, Caitlyn to be the innocent white woman, and now all of white America gets on code because I told you the only time white America is on the same page is when it's time to be racist, and so now they all rally behind her. So they wanted Caitlyn to win last year. They wanted her to win this year. They were happy that LSU got knocked out this year before they made it to the final round. They were ecstatic, so they just knew that Caitlyn had it, and guess what happened? South Carolina said, not so fast. And then even when you look at the media run, they tried to paint it as, oh, it's an upset. I'm like, why is it an upset? South Carolina was undefeated the whole season. How is it an upset that they won? Oh, my God. People, I can't do it. I cannot do it. Make it make sense. Anyway, that's all my big topics. We're going to read the chat. We're going to chop it up for a few minutes, and then I'm going to bed. I'm sorry we didn't have any light subjects tonight. Normally, we have the fun stories. There's just too much going on, man. I've had it. Had enough. We're tired. We are tired. Sick of it said corporate tax was 50% in the 50s, 25% in the 90s, 13% now. And they're going to cut it even lower. Even when you're talking about the super rich, right? When we get up to the point when before Reagan got in there, when Carter was still in office, the tax rate for the super wealthy was up to 70%. Reagan brought that way, way down, right? And when you're talking about why we now have a $34 trillion deficit or debt, that's not even the deficit. The deficit is, I forgot how much it is every year, but the national debt is $34 trillion right now. A lot of that comes into the point or comes into the fact that the very wealthy, the super rich, don't pay the same tax rate anymore because it was that tax rate that helped to keep us out of a lot of the debt. And so now the middle class, which is barely existing, and the working poor and the working class have to make up for that amount of revenue that's no longer coming from the tax cuts that were given to the rich, right? So all this is tied together, so much of it. Course correction said Janet's costumes have been upgraded. She was cool on the last tour. I really like that gold bodysuit. She looked good in that. And she had what else did I like? I liked the black and white suit that kind of looked like the Velvet Rope tour. I liked all that. Like I said, I got Janet Jackson muted on everything, so I don't see any of the concert until my show on July 12th. And I might go to the Baltimore show the next day, depending on what my money looks like. So yeah, I haven't seen anything. So yeah, good for you, Janet, if you stepped it up. But Janet likes to be comfortable. Like she said that when I was watching the one interview. She likes to be in sweats and sneakers, which honestly I prefer. Because when she's in sweats and sneakers, that's when she's doing her dancing. When she's a little too cute and they give her the heels and the bodysuits and stuff, she moves a little different because she's probably uncomfortable. You need the clothes to be a little bit loose. You got to be able to move around. So there's that. Jay Wastefield said, hey, Calvin, not the grassy knolls. I be thinking about every time I see some really terrible story, I'm like, ain't no more grassy knolls around here, huh? Crazy. Anyway. All right. I appreciate y'all for hanging with me tonight. This has been a fun live. Pretty RJ444 said, it's clear propaganda. She's not even having a good season. Go compare her to Angel Reese. We're watching the go compare her to Angel Reese. We are watching the game because Angel Reese has more endorsements than yeah, you had to call it a clear lady, Lord. But it's interesting because right now the narrative is they're trying to say the reason people are going to the WNBA games and everything is specifically because of Caitlyn. And like I said, a lot of women's sports have just become really, really competitive in the last few years, even with soccer. Like when you look at how women's soccer has gotten so big in the last decade, because it totally outpaced the men. The men are finally catching up, right? The women have just been getting it in with their different sports. And so it's a collective thing. So when they try to center it on one person, that's some jacked up stuff. That's some messed up stuff. And trying to make the wrong person the face of it. Everybody be nicer to her. What do you mean be nicer to her? I bet you if there was a hockey league with white women and there was a black woman that joined, y'all wouldn't be saying be nice to the white woman. And in hockey, you can fight. That would be the one time they'd probably be slapping the black lady every 5 minutes they could. Every minute she's gonna be getting slammed into the wall. Yeah, hockey, the American way. Get out of here. Aja Wilson, thank you. Because that girl, you want to talk about bad. Now that's somebody who gets it in. Right? If you want to give somebody some credit for laying it out, when you're talking about the stats that she has, that's some stuff to celebrate and rally behind. That's why I'm like, y'all be out here playing these games. Thank you for bringing that up, JK12. Like, she's no joke. Asia. It's not Aja. I'm sorry. Asia. Thank you. I kept seeing her stats on social media this week. I don't really follow the WNBA like that, but I've been paying attention this past year. So yeah, I saw like she got some crazy stats. Anyway, Calvin, what do you think of the kind of media turn with J-Lo and the flow of bad press impression of late? Some people were saying, well, the thing is when you're a celebrity, you put all your business out there and you constantly over bombard the public with everything you have going. When they respond not so nicely, that's what happens. I will say I still kind of feel somewhat bad, at least the piece with the divorce and stuff, because that's not something that she went and announced. That's kind of something that, people like a TMZ, they just go and look up at the court documents and wait to go find stuff and then announce it. So something like, the idea of her spending $20 million on her album project and doing a short film and a movie and all the other stuff, not really my cup of tea, but go for it. It didn't do that well. I'm not going to sit here and bask and celebrate and start a parade because I'm not pressed about J-Lo, right? I didn't celebrate the cancellation of her tour, which to me, something still, people were saying the tour was canceled because the numbers were bad, but her numbers weren't bad. When I was looking, most of the shows were like 70% sold out and the tour wasn't starting until next month, which is pretty average for a lot of folks where as you get closer to the actual date, most of the tickets that haven't been sold end up getting sold about a week and a half before the concert. That's normally what ends up happening. She should take a break away from the public. And I think sometimes when you give people too much, people get tired of you. And again, I think I said this on the last live. I think I said this on a podcast that I was just a guest on. I think what's really worked against her is generationally, the next generation became privy to not her as an artist, but the business model behind somebody like a J-Lo. And I think a lot of people aren't down with that. The idea of, a lot of people doing the reference tracks and the vocals are left on the reference track and then she gets the credit for it and they're uncredited. Stuff like that pisses people off, right? And the idea, then you get the Mariah Carey, J-Lo thing. J-Lo didn't personally go and destroy Mariah Carey, but Tommy Mottola did and decided he was going to make J-Lo the arch nemesis of Mariah and so she's kind of the face of a lot of ills within the industry. So people kind of have a smoke for her. But it's interesting because I will say the internet does kind of have like a mob mentality where they pick and choose when it's time to just pound on somebody. And I just think there were other people we could have wailed on. You know what I mean? But, oh, well, from Taylor Swift, if there's somebody I'm tired of, let me know when y'all get tired of Taylor. They didn't call me for that one. Let me see. Did you talk about Trump and his charges? I talked about him on the last live, his conviction, which watch him not go to jail. Just watch. Trump gonna be at home talking trash to us. All right. Yeah. But as far as J-Lo, I think yes, read the room, take a break, and yeah, I didn't think it was a dope idea to push the Ben Affleck thing in our faces again because I'm like people were tired of that in 2003. That's why nobody went and saw Geely when it came out. But this kind of pounding on the lady is some of it's performative. Some of it is people are like, this is the karma for some of the things that's happening in the industry. But I don't like seeing people get pounded on too much. So because it makes me think back to like how people were trying to do Will Smith after the slap, which is very interesting because you would have swore Will Smith shot somebody in the face the way they were acting with that one. And even with the articles that were coming out with, is America ready to forgive Will? I'm like, the only people still mad at Will is white folks. Black folks you had some black people who were disappointed and bought into respectability politics and didn't like that he did that on national TV. But I can tell you right now, black people 2 years later are not like, I'm not going to see the Bad Boy movie because I'm still upset with Will over that slap. That ain't us. We moved on. Like, understand, we will be disappointed and then we move on. We don't sit here and, unless you done did some terrible stuff. We're a very forgiving collective. We take care of our own. That's how a lot of our legends are still, viable and still able to sell out arenas and stuff because a lot of times white America will dump them and it's literally us that keep them afloat and keep their career going. So, yeah. Oh, Nathan Moore, did you see Calvin, did you see the Sister Act 2 reunion on The View? I did. I really enjoyed hearing Tanya Blunt Tanya be singing. I'm wondering what's going on. I know they're doing a Sister Act 3. Whoopi said it's coming. I'm excited to see that. Sister Act, I don't know which one is my favorite out of the two. You would think I would say Sister Act 2, but Sister Act, the original, is actually really, really good too. So I'm always back and forth with which one I like the most. But I'm looking forward to the third one. Now, Tyler Perry is producing it. He's the man behind the money, but he's not directing it. So we'll see how it goes. Jerry said, I'm still mad at Will. All right. Let's see. Crazy Homebody Girl said, you could never make me hate Will. Like, listen, I already did a video on it. Half of y'all fought me on it. Y'all did not like my opinion. I already said, I really think the reason why they got so mad at Will wasn't even a slap. They were mad at the part where he said, keep my wife's effing name out your mouth in the way that he said it. That just came off a little too aggressive for people who in the past, Will Smith was digestible enough for them to love. And so when that came out, they said, oh no, that he's got a little too black for us. That's too scary. Now he's dangerous. And then you have people like Amy Schumer doing the most, like, I was so scared backstage. Amy, shut up. Well, hey, Will, you think we're about to hit you too? Okay, this is not a rehearsal with the Jackson 5 kids where one mess up and everybody about to get beat. This is not that. Like, please, Amy, shut up. Anyway, I'm done with the Will Smith conversation, but I'll probably do a review of Bad Boys when I see it. Man. This up was 2 years ago. We're moving on. We got Project 2025 going on. If you think I'm about to lose sleep over a slap, y'all don't even do that with all these other A-list actors that do things that are 10 times more terrible. Y'all keep forgiving them. Woody Allen's still being celebrated, and he's a whole freaking pedophile. All right. Can I go to bed, y'all? It's 12:18. I'm ready to go to bed. Somebody said no one talks about Chris had his right fistball up. And it's crazy because as much as Chris gets on my nerves, he is one of my favorite comedians. He's always been one. And not in recent years, but coming up, like, Sinbad is my ultimate favorite comedian of everything. Chris Tucker is my favorite comedic actor. And Chris Rock was one of my favorite comedians when it came to a lot of his, like, political opinions and stuff back from, I'm going to say, about 2008 on back. I'm not as into him now because he just does a lot of stuff I don't align with. And Everybody Hates Chris is one of my favorite sitcoms. So, yeah, it killed me that went down. But, you know, to each his own. But Sinbad is one of my favorites. I think his sitcom was very, very underrated. Some of the episodes are on YouTube. The sitcom he had way back when. And Ray J was on that show, if you remember. Speaking of Ray J, now I saw that interview where he was talking about he could sing circles around Tyrese. I said, Ray J, now, Tyrese gets on my nerves, and Tyrese and I probably agree on nothing. But if there's one thing, Tyrese sings down. And I have yet to, unless y'all can tell me in the chat, I don't know of any songs that I've heard from Ray J where I'm like, oh, that boy is singing. And yeah, he definitely give Tyrese a run for his money. I don't see it. See, you should have said somebody like Jeremiah, right? You should have said somebody like maybe Omarion, like, because we watched the verses. We saw what it is that you were able to give us. So the idea of singing circles around Tyrese, I don't know about. You jumped a few lines, right? You know, it's kind of like, you know, when people first start trying to sing professionally or they want to start singing in front of audiences, you know, when they first start out, you know, they start with the easy songs. They start with something that's in their pocket. And then, you know, eventually they get to the Whitney Houston covers or the Luther Vandross covers or the Patti LaBelle or the Regina Belle, or, you know, that's when they get to those kind of folks. You don't normally just show up on day one if you ain't ever really been a singer before and start trying to sing Love Under New Management by Mickey Howard and think you're going to kill it. No, you better start easy. Like, you better go to Paul. You start with Paula Abdul. You go to Rush. Giving me a rush. You start there, work your way up, and then you might work your way up to the next person. Maybe now you've made it up to Jen. You know, let's wait a while. Yeah, you're there now, right? And then you might move up. Now we've gotten to Karen White. You might be able to tackle Superwoman, right? You got layers to this. You don't just jump out to the Jennifer Hudson, you know, and I'm telling you Jennifer Holiday, and I'm telling you Fantasia 2 weeks notice, but you got to get there, okay? Right? Ray J said, I sing circles around Tyrese. I said, and where? How big are the circles? Be for real. All right. But if y'all can tell me in the chat, I can't think of a single Ray J song where I'm hearing these vocals. And I'm sorry, One Wish I never liked because I don't like how that sounds. That I don't know what that was we were listening to, but the melody was nice. I'm not trying to cook the guy. That just was not my song. I did not like it. I didn't think he could sing. I did like that song Lie. It was on like the Set It Off soundtrack. But listen, Ray J is a member of the Thin Voice Club, and it's fine. But to try to go against Tyrese, like, okay, just no. Somebody, Miss Renee said Tyrese can't sing either, though. Wait a minute, y'all, have we forgotten about Sweet Lady? And how you gonna act like that? And lately, wait, y'all mad about the play in Tyrese's face. Now he get on my nerves, but we can't sit here and say Tyrese can't sing. Tyrese be singing, right? There's a reason why they gave him that Coca-Cola endorsement. Crazy Homebody Girl said, I don't know about Omarion. Mario walked into. I don't think Omarion's the strongest vocalist anyway. He has enough voice to get by. He can do the job, but he was off key that whole verses too, right? Not y'all laughing at me saying start with Paula Abdul. And this is not to cook Paula. Y'all know I like Paula. I don't be caring. Y'all be trying to cook Paula Abdul all the time. I look on my gym playlist, all the Paula songs be in that mix. We be in that pumping iron, right? It's a cold hearted snake be going off. But Paula do be off key a little bit on some of those songs because I was just listening to Vibology came on, and there's a note that came on. I was like, wait a minute. And I had to rewind. Like, it's a part where she's saying, like, she says, like, I'm in a funky something, and they do like this O. It's like this stacked O where it's them saying O in like 4 different keys, but one of the keys is off. And I don't know if that's Paula or the backup singers, but I'm like, somebody is off on that. And I don't know how y'all let that make it to the record. I think that's what Whitney Houston was talking about when she said Paula is singing off key on the record. That's just my guess. But no, I like Paula. Paula gives you a stage show, right? She ain't the best singer, but she knew how to work a show. If you can't sing, but you have showmanship, I can still be entertained. I just need to be wild. And when I look at the when she did The Way That You Love Me at the AMAs in 90 and all that footwork, and they was flipping her, and she was Paula was eating that crap. I ain't even mad at her. So there's that. She ain't really my go-to for like the singers, but as far as the visual people, sure. I don't know if I could sit through a concert and listen to that, but visually those videos were fun, especially Opposites Attract is, I ain't gonna lie, Opposites Attract is one of my karaoke songs. I like to do the man's part on that. But yeah. So yeah. And it's not saying that you just have to be able to dance. Like, you can dance, but I still need there to be a little something there. You got to still offer more, because there's a bunch of non-singing singers that dance, and even they are uneventful, some of them. So, man, you just got to be a good performer. Seeing the Sunset said, hi, Calvin, you cutting up. Paula has been off-key many times. I'm just talking about the song I heard the other day on my playlist. I was like, what? He said, I'm in the funky way. And then I just heard like, oh, or no, it wasn't that high. It was like, oh, I was like, what was that? I was like, wait a minute. Oh, I had to rewind it. Like, I didn't know if it was my headphones. Like, I know this thing on the record. All right, I had the backup singers off key. Y'all, if anything, the backup singers normally carry the singer. So like, sometimes the singers that don't have the strongest voices have these really great backup singers. Like, think back to like even Britney, right? Britney didn't have the strongest voice, but when she would tour, if she had backup singers, she had like the church choir singers, right? She'd have a strong group with her. So like, I remember she did what's that song? The Not Yet a Woman song, and then background singer, Not Yet a Woman. I was like, oh, these background singers are singing. Like, okay, man. Or even like Janet's background singers on Black Cat. But I will say Janet does her own backgrounds on her songs. But when she's on tour, them background singers, you're a rebel now. Like, they just be screaming. I'm like, y'all better get it. But anyway, yeah. I know my neighbor, whoever lives on this side be sick of me, but they'll be all right. I pay too much in rent, so I'm going to make as much noise as I want to, and they'll be all right. They don't speak anyway. So, all right. We got 3 more minutes, and then I'm going to bed. Somebody says Stevie Wonder has a thin voice, but he can sing and write. I don't think Stevie really has a thin voice, because when I think of like I've Never Dreamed You'd Leave in the Summer, I think that's a really, not everybody can sing something like that, especially as you get to the second half of the song. Like that demands some, you got to have a chest voice to really pull that one off. So I don't know if I consider Stevie a thin voice singer. Like, I think that he's a gift in its own right. He's his own planet. So I don't know if I would consider Stevie that. Let's see. Somebody say, hey, bro, how much do you read? What do you read? I read a whole lot. Right now, the book I'm reading is I Want My MTV. It's actually a very interesting book. Oh, some of the cool things I learned in this book so far, like I told you, I have this in my note app. I just have a note that just says facts. And it's like all the facts that I've learned over time. And I always write anything that I've learned down. So this thing just goes and goes and goes. Let me see. Some of the cool things that I've learned from reading this book. Which was very, very interesting. And I'm definitely going to utilize some of this information in some of the next like music docs when I get to them. So we always talk about MTV and Michael Jackson and how they didn't want to play his videos and stuff. So what was crazy is by the time MTV finally played Billie Jean, the song had already been out for 2 months and had already been #1 in the country, right? And then, whatchamacallit. So by the time they added Billie Jean to the rotation, they didn't even want to play it, so they were only playing it 2 to 3 times a day. And then, mind you, like I said, it was already #1 in the country. Like it had already peaked before the video had even found its way to MTV, right? So then they were like, we'll play the stupid video fine. And they're only playing it like 2 to 3 times a day. And like I said in my Janet So What Happened video, this was the era when MTV only had about 120 music videos to play. And 30 of those videos were from Rod Stewart. Oddly enough, Rod Stewart got like 30 music videos before 1983, right? And so what ends up happening is they finally switched to heavy rotation with Billie Jean a month later. And that was 1 week before they started playing like Beat It, right? So like so what ends up happening is both Beat It and Billie Jean are in heavy rotation on MTV exactly at the same time, because Billie Jean had already kind of peaked. And then once it had its resurgence again on MTV, it kind of gave the song a second win. And then Beat It is again doing its thing. And so that's why they always say like 83 is the year of Michael. And then they say 84 is also the year of Michael, because then Thriller, the video, comes out in November of 83, rides into 84, and brings the album back up. And they did not want to do the Thriller video. They were already done. The label had already said, you've already sold your 10 million albums. This album is finished with. We're not spending any money, especially because the initial budget for Thriller was going to be $500,000. And the label's like, you can go straight to hell with that, Michael. And then Michael's like, well, fine, I'll pay for it. And it eventually was $700,000, and it became this big, massive, massive thing. But it's crazy how much would happen there. What else did I learn? But no, so that's what I've kind of been reading right now. Let's see, what else have I been reading as of late? What's in my library? I'm looking at my Audible. I got my actual books on that side too, the big ones you see when I'm sitting in front of the books when I'm doing the pre-made videos. I have Saying It Loud by Mark Whitaker. That one. I just got Clay Kane's The Grift. I haven't started it yet, but I'm gonna get with that one. And the other one that I have right now is Music is History by Amir Khalid. Those are like the 5 that are in my rotation that I'm trying to get through. All right. We are not coming after Patti LaBelle, Avocado Queen. We're not doing that tonight. Avocado Queen is always shaking the table on every live. She be ready. Every time. Beautiful Bill said Daniel Caesar has the thinnest voice. Well, I will say this. The gift that works with thin voice singers, including myself, is we always have these really great falsettos. So it's really great for layering vocals. That's the one thing. Did we talk about Brandy and Monica, the cameo in Ariana Grande's video? They need to go ahead and do this tour. I just saw those pictures. At first, I didn't think the pictures were real. I thought it was like AI or something. But no, that's really, really cool. I love that they're getting, their just due. Love that for them. Somebody said Sinbad is a national treasure. His health is fully restored. Yeah, I'm rooting for him. I'm glad he's like walking and talking and starting to, do content again. I wish him well. If you didn't know, he had a stroke a while back. So, yeah. But yeah, so the idea of a thin voice it's not a bad thing. It just means you don't have a heavy bottom in your voice. But it normally means that you have a head voice that's pretty flexible and you can do a lot of things with it. So, like somebody like a Prince technically has a thinner voice, but Prince could do a whole bunch of different things. He was able to still make his own sound, and he was still able to make things work for him. So a song like A Raspberry Beret or Little Red Corvette or Incense and Candles or Diamonds and Pearls or Love Sign, it works for what it is that he brings to the table. And because he already produces his stuff, he's able to build his sound around his voice to make it fit well. And in one of the interviews he had after his second album, he talked about how he didn't like singing out of his chest because it was uncomfortable, and that's why he liked to sing in his head voice and in his falsetto, because that was more so his lane, that was his pocket. And so sometimes a nice head voice really works. And I think that's why a song like, The Beautiful Ones off Purple Rain soundtrack is a fan favorite. One of my favorites of his is When Two Are in Love. Love that one. Sometimes you don't need the big voice for every song. It depends on what it is that you bring to the table. I like a nice variety of a bit of everything, which is why I can love a Janet Jackson, but also be obsessed with Phyllis Hyman. Or be obsessed with Phil Perry and Kevon Edmonds as vocalist, right? You get a bit of everything. All right. We have, it's time to go to bed, y'all. All right. This has been fun. I have enjoyed this. What up, Mary Connor? She said, just got here and cheered up. I'm sorry, we're about to get off, but we had a great time. And don't worry, when we do the replay, you got 3 hours and 7 minutes to go through. All right. So you guys stay safe, stay sane, enjoy your nights, have a great week. And again, mind your business so that you can age well. And I will see you next time. All right, guys. Good night. See you later.